Ta-da!
To explain the characteristics profile, let's use the High Elf Archer here as an example. Let's go through each of these letters and numbers one at a time. M stands for movement, in this case 5 inches. WS is weapon skill, and that is the ability to fight in close combat, in this case weapon skill of 4. BS is ballistic skill, that is the ability to shoot artillery weapons, and the ballistic skill in this case is 4. S is strength of 3. T is toughness of 3. W is the number of wounds, in this case only 1. I is the initiative, how quickly they attack in close combat, in this case it is a 5. A is the attacks, the number of attacks, in this case 1. And LD is leadership, and this is a leadership of 8. Now, based upon these characteristics, you may be called upon to take what is called characteristic tests. Now, in a characteristic test, you will always roll a d6 and compare that against the specific characteristic you are looking at. Let's give you an example. For example, if you are called upon to take a characteristic test against toughness, the toughness of the archer is 3. Now that means you have to roll a d6, and if the score is equal to or less than the number in the profile, the test is passed with no ill effect. If the score is greater than the number in the model's profile, the test has been failed. So in this case, we should roll this, and if we roll a 4, 5, or 6, we fail the test. And that is a 6, so we would fail the test. Now if we were, for example, to look at initiative, the initiative of the archer is a 5. So if we were to roll this, we would have to roll a 6 to fail. In this case, we rolled a 2, so we passed. We should also note here that a roll of a 1 is always going to be a success, and a roll of a 6 is always a failure. And finally, the last test we will discuss is the leadership test. The leadership is always rolled with 2d6 and compared to the leadership score of the figure in question. In this case, we have a leadership of 8, so if we need to pass our leadership test, we need to roll a 1 through an 8 on 2d6. We roll a 7, so we have passed the leadership test. Were we to roll a 9, 10, 11, or 12, we would have failed. Line of sight is important for various situations, including charging, certain spells, and shooting. A good simple rule of thumb is if there is unobstructed view, and if the target is within the forward arc of the model here, then we can say that without question that you have a direct line of sight. In some cases, however, we will not have such a clear unobstructed line of sight, so we actually need to get down and look from the eye's perspective of the figure itself to see if we can in fact literally see the target from the eyes of the figurine. Let's give you an example. Now, once we've gotten down on the actual eye level of the figurine, we need to remember that we need to have a clear view of a head, torso, arms, legs, basically the body of the target. Seeing wings, tails, weapons, banners alone are not sufficient for us to have line of sight. So let's take a look here. If we pan up a little bit and we look behind this building here, we can see that we see a wing from the griffin. That will not be sufficient to count for line of sight. Now, were we, of course, to remove this building, once again, there we had the griffin in full view and we would have line of sight. If we move the building back, we can see here that we have partial view of the griffin and the prince. So we can say here that the griffin and prince are in fact in our line of sight. There may be other cases, for example, when looking through a forest, that we will have partial line of sight. This will count as line of sight because we can in fact see the griffin from the eyes of the archer, but as we will discuss later when we discuss cover, the griffin and the prince will be given some protection because they are behind soft cover, in this case a forest. Nevertheless, we can still see them, they are in our line of sight. In this specific case with the archer, line of sight is required if he is going to fire his bow and shoot some arrows at the prince and the griffin. So line of sight in this case is very important. Just a brief note as we begin, there is a key difference between what is called a game turn and a player turn. Basically, most games are 6 game turns, and each of those game turns encompasses 2 player turns, or if you're playing Triumph and Treachery, perhaps 3 player turns or 4 player turns. What I would like to do here in this video is to focus in on the one specific player turn and the 4 different phases that are involved in that. Let's look at each of the phases one at a time. The first phase is the movement phase, and there are 4 sub-phases. 1, start of the turn. 2, charges. 3, compulsory moves. And 4, remaining moves. The second phase is the magic phase. This is where you roll for the winds of magic, and you follow these steps as you go through this phase. 1, you cast. 2, dispel. 3, spell resolution. And 4, next spell. Third is the shooting phase. What you'll do here is work through each unit that wishes to shoot one by one, and we'll follow these steps. 1, nominate the unit to shoot. 2, choose a target. 3, roll to hit. 4, roll to wound. 5, take saving throws. 6, remove casualties. Finally, phase 4 is the close combat phase. And this is where you decide which order you want to resolve your close combats, and we follow these steps. 1, fight a round of close combat. 2, calculate close combat results. 3, the loser takes a break test. 4, flee and pursue. In future 3-minute rules, we will be looking at each of these phases in turn and breaking them down and looking at their sub-phases as well. First of all, the most basic movement is just simply the forward movement. If you look at the movement characteristic on the characteristic profile, you will see how many inches the figurine typically moves forward. In this case, we have our high elf archer here with a movement of 5 inches. So a normal movement would just simply be 5 inches straight ahead, like so. In addition to the normal move, there is also the possibility of doing a march move. And the march move is simply double the normal movement characteristic. So in this case, we have a normal characteristic of 5, so marching would allow us to move a full 10 inches. Furthermore, a unit like this unit of 3 elven archers is able now to also move backwards and to move sideways. Now, what this means is they are only allowed to make half of their normal movement, rounded up. So if we take a 5-inch movement characteristic, divide it in half is 2.5 inches rounded up to 3. So if moving backwards, we can move the whole unit backwards a full 3 inches if we would like. The same goes for moving sideways. We would move 3 inches sideways. One additional thing we should mention here is the 1-inch rule, is that in moving, we are allowed to move within 1 inch of friend, foe, or impassable terrain. For example, this rock, if we designate that as impassable terrain. So unless you're charging, you will always need to remain 1 inch away when you move up to something. And one final note, if you are in fact moving, you should be aware that for most figurines, most of the time they cannot march and shoot. So be aware of that. Unless you are special, like fast cavalry, where you can in fact march and shoot. Be aware that if you march, your weapons will be holstered and you will not be able to shoot later in the shooting phase. In addition, some weapons, like the dwarven handguns, are move or fire, so any movement at all means you cannot shoot in that turn. Be aware of that when you're making your movements. To begin, let's look at the maneuver of the wheel. Now, what the wheel is basically an opportunity to move your forces in an entire unit without needing to reform them in any way. Let's use the example here of the Inner Circle Knights and the War Horses here. I like this example because these have a normal movement of 8 inches, so we can actually march and wheel, so we can get 16 inches out of this for this example. Before we begin to move, we should actually note here though that when performing a wheel, you can only do it when you are moving forward. Wheels cannot be performed when you're moving sideways or moving backwards. It's far too complicated of a maneuver. The wheel functions very simply like this. This corner will remain in place when we are pivoting, and we will measure from the outside model. And let's begin here by simply pivoting and moving 3 inches. And let's move ahead 2 inches more. That gives us a total of 5 inches. Come back here and we will pivot 2 more inches. That's 7 inches. And that leads us to have a total of 9 inches left. So we can make the remainder of our march move 9 inches ahead. And as you see, we have wheeled our way nicely around that hinder. The second maneuver I would like to demonstrate here is the maneuver of the reform. Now typically you can completely rearrange your unit and face it in any direction or change the rank and file by giving up all other movement and shooting. In order to demonstrate this maneuver, I will use this unit of Dwarf Warriors. Now, one of the simplest ways to reform is simply to change the direction of the unit. Now remember, when making a reform, you want to keep the center of the unit in exactly the same place. So one simple reform would simply be something like this. Shift the unit around, keep the center in the same place, now facing a new direction. Another common type of reform is to change the number of ranks or files. In this case, let's do this. Let's just move our figurines over like this and turn our unit into a larger fighting machine like so. It is important to note that in this reform in particular, but in all reforms, no figurine may move more than double of its normal movement. In this case, that would be 6 inches. As you can see here, the guys on the outside are simply moving out 2 inches. So this is an acceptable reform. Third, it is also possible to do both of these two things at the same time. You may want to change your position, and you may want to, in fact, change the number of ranks and files. Both are entirely acceptable as long as you remember to keep the center of the unit in the same place. A final note here, if you happen to have a musician in your unit, which we do in this unit of Dwarf Warriors, we have a musician, you can perform what is called a swift reform, and this is outlined on page 95 of the rulebook. Basically, a swift reform allows you to make a reform without being penalized for shooting or movement. So what you need to do if you want to carry out a swift reform is to declare a swift reform attempt and roll for a leadership test. We got a 7. Leadership here is 9, so that's a successful swift reform roll, and then we can move our reform maneuver and move and shoot as normal. Were I to declare a swift reform and roll a 10, 11, or 12, that would mean that I cannot pull off the swift reform, so I make the reform as normal and take the penalties for the reform maneuver. The start of the turn is the part of the movement phase where the player first resolves any actions or rules that must happen at the start of the turn. Typically, this is a fairly uneventful part of the movement phase, but I would like to show you an example with the goblins and the orcs. This information can be found in the Orcs and Goblins army book, but at the beginning of the turn, the start of the turn, the orcs and the goblins, both of these, have to test for what is called animosity. So let's roll for animosity. If they roll a 1, then the animosity goes into effect. Let's start here, a 3 here, and a 6 here. So according to this goblin turn, if this were their movement phase, animosity would have no effect, and that would be the end of the start of the turn. Were we to roll a 1 at the start of the turn for the goblins and orcs, we would have to then consult the animosity table. And let's just do that right now to show you how this would work. I would roll a 4, and a 4 on the animosity table is a squabble. For a squabble, if it is possible to do so, the unit must declare a charge against the closest enemy unit in the charge subphase. If they are unable to do so, to declare a charge, then a rowdy squabble breaks out and the unit may not move in the movement phase, cast spells, nor shoot this turn. If this unit now were within charge range, we would say, okay, we will charge with this unit during the charge subphase of the movement phase. So that would take care of that squabble animosity. So once we've resolved that special rule for the orcs and goblins, that is the end of the start of the turn. Now make sure you consult your different army books and the army that you are playing to see if in fact there are different things you need to do during the start of the turn. If not, skip over that part of the movement phase and move directly on to the second part, which is declare charges. To begin, the attacking unit will pick any one of its units and declare a charge on any one of the enemy units, after which the enemy will be given the chance to make a charge reaction, and after that is resolved, you move on to the next declaration of a charge. To begin then, all you need to do simply is to decide which unit you are going to declare a charge with, and you decide which unit you want to charge. I typically use these sort of markers to help us remember which unit is charging which unit. Now there are a few things you want to keep in mind when you're declaring a charge. The first thing is that the unit that is declaring a charge needs to have a clear line of sight to the unit that it is charging. In this case, we have a clear line of sight, no obstructions. Second of all, the unit being charged must lie within the forward arc of the unit declaring the charge. So we can use our forward arc measuring tool here to see that if you extend the lines out here, this unit is clearly within the forward arc of the unit that has declared the charge. Third, in order to declare a charge, it must be a possible charge, which means that the unit being charged must lie within the charge range of the charging unit. So what that means now is that if we go back to our Elven Archers here, they have a movement characteristic of 5. And now because they are infantry, we will be rolling 2d6 here. And what we see here is the maximum possible range they have for charging would be, if we roll a 6 and a 6, which would be 12, plus our 5 would be 17 inches. This unit now is 14 inches away, so it is within the possible charge range of the High Elves, and we say that is therefore a possible charge. It is important to remember that before declaring a charge, it is always possible to measure the distance beforehand. Fourth, a charge must in fact be possible to complete. In this case, even if we can draw a line of sight over here, we can see that that house will get in the way of the charge, so that would be an impossible charge, so we cannot declare that one. And fifth, if this unit were already in combat with this other unit of Goblin Archers, then it is not possible to declare another charge if that unit is already in combat. So this would be an impossible charge to declare. In summary then, we pick our unit to declare a charge, and we declare which unit we will be charging against. And it must be possible to charge that unit. As you notice, this unit here is at 18 inches outside of our possible charge range. This unit, however, is within our possible 17-inch range, so we can in fact charge that. We are not obstructed by anything to complete the charge, and we are not in combat, so that is a possible charge to declare. Once this charge is declared and it is resolved, we may then pick a new unit to make a new charge. Technically now there are only two kinds of charge reactions, and this would be the stand and shoot as the first and flee as the second, but we will include the hold here in this description. To explain the hold, let's pretend that this unit of Elven Archers is charging this unit of Night Goblin Spearmen. Now, if a unit is going to hold, it simply stands fast in place to receive the charge. A unit like this will typically hold if it has no missile weapons and it fancies that it has good chances in the combat. In this case, they will in fact hold. In addition, any unit that is already in close combat, for example with this unit of Illyrian Reavers, must always hold if another unit declares a charge against it. Second, we have a possibility of the stand and shoot. Now let's pretend that the archers declare a charge against this unit of Goblin Archers. If this unit here elects to perform a stand and shoot, it readies its missile weapons and gives the charging unit a swift volley. And this is of course only possible if the unit being charged does in fact have missile weapons. An important rule to remember is that it is only possible for this unit to perform a stand and shoot if the charging unit is further away than its move characteristic. In this case, Elven Archers move 5 inches, so they must be further than 5 inches away for them to have the time to load their arrows and shoot. As we can see here, they are more than 8 inches away, so this is possible to carry out. In addition, some missile weapons are slow to fire and do not allow for stand and shoot. Another important point, were this unit for some reason to begin outside of the range for the weapons here, in this case short bows 18 inches, we can still perform a stand and shoot because we assume that this unit charges into the point within range of these weapons in which then the stand and shoot is carried out. Let's walk through an example now of the stand and shoot. To begin here, we will declare a charge with this unit on that unit. They perform a stand and shoot, which means they will have 2 rows now, 5 in each, attacking with 5 shots. And we will go through this rather quickly and explain this more in the shooting phase. But now we can just say, to make things quick, that they will be hitting on 5s. So we can remove everything that is not a 5. And that means we have 4 hits and wounding on 4s. And there are 2 wounds. And we can say that these guys have a 6+ save for their armor. So we take 2 of them, and as you see, we save 1, which means that stand and shoot will pick off 1 guy. Now that was not a very powerful stand and shoot, but let us pretend for a second that the Goblin Archers actually were able to have 3 kills, and they were able to pick off 3 of these guys, which would drop them below their 25% threshold, which means they would need to take a panic test in the middle of their charge. Let's say we roll this out and we actually get a 5, and their leadership is in fact an 8. That would mean that where they are standing right now, or if wherever they entered the 18-inch range here, they would have to in fact turn around exactly where they are and roll now for a panic roll, in this case 11 inches, which would take them 11 inches that way. That would be a very powerful stand and shoot because it stopped an enemy in its tracks and turned it around and actually had it run 11 inches. In most cases now, there is no downside to a stand and shoot over simply holding. You'll probably manage to pick off a few of these charging enemies as they come. You might even get them to turn around and flee. So normally it's a good idea to shoot if you can. To discuss the flee reaction, let's use this example of the Elven Archers charging the Goblin Archers. Now you will typically want to declare a flee reaction if you think your unit has no chance of surviving the fight. In addition, were this unit already fleeing, it would have to declare a flee reaction. Fleeing units must always continue to flee. So let's walk through the flee now. This unit has declared a charge, and this unit now will declare a flee. The first step is to simply turn this unit around its center. And we will turn it away from the center of this unit right here. And that will put us in position now to roll out our flee roll. Once we have turned our unit around now, facing directly away from the center, actually let's straighten it out a little bit more. What we'll do then is roll, in this case for infantry, 2d6. In this case we got a total of 9 inches. And now with our measuring device down here, we can measure out 9 inches, and that will bring our fleeing unit right here 9 inches away. With this unit now fled, this unit of Elven Archers has a few different options. One option is it can choose to try to pursue that fled unit and catch it. We are actually 12 inches away, which means we'd have to roll double 6s in order to do that. So it's very unlikely. Let's roll it out and see. No, that would be a 2 and a 1 for 3 inches. So if we roll that out to try and catch them when we get a 2 and a 1, it would be what is called a failed charge or failed pursuit. In this case, you take the highest of the 2 dice, in this case a 2, and we would simply turn our archers and move them 2 inches forward, and that is where that charge would end. If we back this up though, say we do in fact roll 2 6s, we're lucky enough to pull it off and get 2 6s, 12 inches. What we would do then is simply move this unit of Elven Archers into contact with the goblins, and we say that when they catch them, they would run them down where they are, and that entire unit of goblins would be removed from the battlefield. A second choice, rather than pursuing here, the Elven Archers can do what is called a redirect. In this case, they can take a leadership test. In this case, with a 4, we made it with a leadership of 8, and they can now redirect their charge to a different target that was within range and is possible. In this case, at the Night Goblin Spearmen. So we will do the same thing and redirect the charge here. Now the Spearmen get to make up their own minds if they want to hold or they want to flee. Let's say in this case they decide to hold, which means that we are able now to try to roll out that charge. Were we to fail the leadership test for the redirect, in this case if we rolled a 10 for example, then we would not be able to redirect against this unit, but we would in fact have to try to complete the charge on that fleeing unit. One more important point here is that each unit is only able to make one redirect for each turn. Two final brief points. Any fleeing unit that flees off the battlefield is simply removed and counted as destroyed. Second of all, it is possible that a single unit may make a couple or several charge reactions during the declaring charge part of the movement phase. For example, if this unit decides to charge here, they could decide to hold, and this unit could jump in and also decide to charge, at which point they may think that's enough and they will simply elect to flee. With all of the charge reactions declared and resolved, it's now time to go back and actually roll out the charges to see if they will be successful. In this case, we will have the High Elf Archers trying to pull off a charge against the Night Goblin Spearmen. Now what you can do as the attacking player is you can choose to work out your charges in any order that you wish. So let's simply begin with this one. So once we bring our measuring stick down, we can measure again to reaffirm the distance. And this was a good charge to declare because it is 12 inches away to this unit. And that is going to be the statistical average for the High Elves. Remember, they have a movement of 5 inches plus a 2d6 in this case because of infantry. And so that will give us a statistical average of 7 on 2 dice plus our 5 is 12. So this is an average distance. In order for this charge to be successful now, we will need to show at least a 7 on this dice plus our 5 for a 12. We roll that out and we've got a 6 and a 4. That will be a 10 plus our 5 is 15 inches. That's more than enough to get in. With a successful roll now, we will move our chargers into base contact with the enemy. And remember this, they move directly forward but are permitted one wheel of up to 90 degrees as they move, and another wheel of unlimited arc once in contact. So as many models as possible from the two units must be brought into base contact. So what we will do here is we will begin with a slight wheel in order to bring this corner into alignment with this corner, and we will move straight forward and strike here. And when we have struck this, we will do what is called closing the door and bring the rest of the unit into base contact like so. It is important to note that that initial wheel was important because it would allow our contact to happen here in the corners. This sort of contact would not have been allowed because we do not have maximized contact, as would something like this not have been allowed because there is not maximum contact. So what we did here in coming in, striking, and closing the door allows for the most models to be into fighting contact. Let's reset this example now and look and see what would happen if we in fact did not roll a high enough number. Let's say on our 2d6, instead of a 7 or more, we in fact rolled a 6. That would in fact be a failed charge. Now what you do in the case of a failed charge is that the unit begins its charge but its energy peters out. And so what we do is we take the highest of the 2 dice, in this case a 5, and what we will do is carry out the movement as if we were going to come into contact. We would do our initial wheel, and then we would move ourselves 5 inches ahead, like so, and that would be where our unit would end its failed charge. Sometimes you may find that your models are able to charge in the flank or the rear, and this is particularly good because it provides you an advantage in combat. I'd like to show you how this looks by using this unit of Dwarf Warriors, and we will have these 4 units of Swordmasters of Hoth set up to show the different kinds of charges. Remember now that a unit's charging position is determined by where it begins with its charge when it declares a charge. Most common is that units will be charging into the front. If you see here, the Swordmasters of Hoth are wholly within the dwarf's forward arc, as you can see from these 45-degree angles out here, so they will be considered charging the front of the enemy. In this unit here, we have 3 of the 5 in the front row of this Swordmasters of Hoth unit is onto the flank of this unit, so we will consider them charging into the flank. The majority of these Swordmasters of Hoth are within the rear of the dwarves, so we will consider them as charging into the rear of that unit. In this case right here, it is hard to tell whether this is in the flank or in the rear because the arc goes right through the center of this model in the center of the 5 here. So in this situation, the best thing to do is to simply roll a die to see randomly which one of these it will land in. For example, we may say 1, 2, 3, they will charge in the rear, 4, 5, 6 onto the flank, let's roll it out, and that's a 5, so we will say they charge on the flank. And once again, when determining the charge, just remember to imagine that there are 45-degree lines heading out from each corner of this unit right here, and then simply use those lines to determine where these charging units lie. Next, we may talk about unusual situations. Sometimes a charging unit can move into contact with its target, but it is unable to close the door, perhaps because there is terrain that is in the way. In this case, what we need to do is to try and move this unit as much as possible to wheel it in order to make the charge possible. Sometimes what we have to do actually is to make the charge and then in fact have the other unit close the door. Allow me to show you an example of what that looks like by using this large horde of Empire archers charging onto these silver helms. What we do here is we would first wheel and then move straight forward, so we bring the corner into contact with the silver helms. Now because of this terrain piece here, we cannot close the door there, so we will have the silver helms actually slide up and they will close the door onto the Empire archers like that. And of course, if no amount of finagling can be done to avoid the obstacles and to complete the charge, then we consider this a failed charge. Let's begin with charging a fleeing enemy. If for whatever reason a unit is able to complete a charge against a fleeing enemy, move that unit into base contact with the enemy and remove the entire enemy unit from play. To illustrate this point, let's use this unit of Swordmasters of Hoth and have them declaring a charge over here on this unit of Goblin Archers. This unit is actually already fleeing. So what we'll do now is we will declare a charge onto that unit. Because this unit is already fleeing, all they can do is elect to flee further. And let's say for this example, they roll double ones, snake eyes. So we move them out here an additional 2 inches, bringing them 8 inches away from the Swordmasters of Hoth. Now the Swordmasters will be given the chance to roll out their charge, 2d6, and we will roll that here. And they get it with no problem. 11 plus their 5-inch movement is a total of 16 inches. So that will bring them now crashing into base contact with the Goblin Archers, at which point this entire unit will be removed from the game as it is hacked to pieces and destroyed. Now a unit that runs down a fleeing enemy in this way will find itself oftentimes pulled out of position, and therefore they are allowed a chance to reform on a leadership roll. The High Elves have a leadership of 8, so let's roll this out. And they actually fail this now with a 10, so they will continue where they are and stay in the position they are when they caught the fleeing unit. Were we to pass the leadership, say if we rolled a 5, with a leadership of 8, this unit would be allowed the opportunity then to make a free reform and to face back into combat. In either case, passing or failing this unit is not allowed to move anymore in the movement phase. Let's look now at multiple charges on a unit. If several units have declared a charge against a single unit, in this case the dwarf unit, then we roll out both of these at the same time and try to move them in so that we are able to maximize the base contact with the unit that is being charged. In other words, we want to have as many models as possible able to fight in the battle. Assuming that both of these models have made successful rolls for charging, let's move them in and show how this looks. Let's take this unit first. We'll bring them in here and hit, and we will close the door, bringing them into base contact like so. With this second unit now, we will do a slight wheel and bring them crashing in like so into base contact. As you can see now, we have maximized the number of models that can join the fight, leading us to have the best combat possible. On occasion, you may run into this where you have multiple units that are declaring a charge and all of them are successful. As you can tell here though, it will not be possible to have all 3 of these units come into base contact with the dwarves. In this case, what you need to do is to try to move the units in like so, and move this unit in like so. And because this unit also made a successful charge, we will move it up to here within 1 inch of its own unit and consider that to be then a failed charge. Moreover, when it is apparent that not all 3 of the units can make their way in, the charging player can always decide which of the units that he or she wants to actually move into combat. We can say in this case, just for this example, we will have those top 2 move in and have them complete the charges. For the most part, players have full control to move their units around as they wish. However, sometimes the player has no control over the movement of their troops, and we refer to this as compulsory moves. Now, all compulsory movement is carried out after charges have been resolved, but before other movement takes place. Fleeing is now the most common type of compulsory move, and fleeing needs to be resolved before all other compulsory moves. In this case, we have the dwarves here. We'll say they have won a combat, taking 2 wounds against the high elves, sword masters of Hoth, and they have in fact fled. I like to use a marker, in this case a red one, to show that this unit is in fact fleeing. Let's imagine now that it is the high elf player's turn and is the compulsory move subphase. This player now is able to pick any one of its units to try and rally, and we will pick this one right now. And what we can do then is move on to take a normal leadership test here with a leadership of 8. Before doing that, we should just remind you that if this unit started to flee in this turn, it cannot attempt to rally. It will have to wait until the next compulsory movement subphase. So let's roll this out now. We have a leadership of an 8, and we pull it off with an 8. So we will say that this unit successfully rallies, and what we can do then is to remove that marker, to turn them around in place to face down their enemy. And in fact, in this case, I would like to put on a new marker, a yellow marker, a golden marker, to show that they are newly rallied. Were we to fail this leadership test and roll something like a 10, we would then be required to continue to flee, and we would roll another 2d6. In this case, we would move another 9 inches in this direction. So what we would do is we would put down our measuring device, and we would measure out 9 inches and move our fleeing units that much further. Regardless of what happens, this unit will have to give up all other movement and shooting for the rest of that turn. One final important point we can make here is that in rallying troops, any unit that has dropped below 25% of its starting number of models in the unit is considered so incredibly demoralized that it can only rally on double ones, what is called insane courage. In this example, we began here with 10 models, and now we have dropped down to 2 models. And we will say now that because we have 2 models, we only have 20% of the starting value of that unit, so we will need to roll double ones to rally here. Insane courage, can we do it? No, a 6 and a 1. So that will now have to be rolled for the continued fleeing of 6 more inches, which will bring them out this direction. Insane courage is of course difficult to roll, but not impossible, and therefore it is still worth the attempt. In conclusion, we may note that on page 95 of the rulebook, it notes that if your unit has a musician, such as this one, you are given a +1 to your leadership rolls when trying to rally your troops. We may begin with move fleeing units. Let's say that this unit of goblin archers was unable to rally this turn, and now it has to continue moving on. Remember that it will keep fleeing in a straight line regardless of what it runs into. In this case, it will be running into an enemy unit of dwarves. Now let's say that they roll 2 2s, which will be 4 inches. We will need to move them 4 inches in this direction. Now if you notice, the 4 inches will bring them here on top of this unit, which will force us now to move it beyond the unit 1 inch away from the unit, like so. To put this in another way, a fleeing unit can never end its flee on top of another unit or on top of dangerous terrain or something else, so we'll always move it 1 inch beyond. Because this unit now fled through an enemy unit, we'll have to take a dangerous terrain test for each one of the models that fled through this unit. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So we take a dangerous terrain test. You can find the rules for this on page 116, but on a roll of a 1, we will take 1 wound, and there are no wounds there, so all 4 of those guys will remain safe. Were we to roll 2 1s, for example, we would remove 2 of the guys off the back where they fled through that unit. The same rule also applies to fleeing through dangerous terrain. If we designate this as dangerous terrain, then we need to roll for 6 dangerous terrain tests. In this case, we failed once, we would remove 1 guy. In addition, if a unit flees through a piece of terrain such as this hedge that is not considered dangerous terrain, no dangerous terrain test is required. Furthermore, were this unit to flee and continue to flee through its own unit, no dangerous terrain test is required because it's friendly, but this unit will have to roll its own panic test as it has been fled through. If we do that now, we see we get a 9, so they would also fail and they would begin to flee away from the nearest enemy. And finally, any unit that in its fleeing comes into contact with the edge of the board is immediately removed from play. Most of your compulsory moves will now consist of either rallying fleeing units or moving fleeing units. However, some other figurines and other units have compulsory moves as well. In this case, you would now move on to other compulsory moves. For this example, I have used here the Night Goblin Fanatics, and during the compulsory movement phase, after rallying or moving fleeing troops, I will then have to do a random movement of 2d6 with the Night Goblin Fanatics. Now these moves and these compulsory movements should all be spelled out clearly in the different army books for the army that you are using, so please be sure to consult that army book. After working out our compulsory moves, we are now ready to make any remaining moves that we would like to make. This is a bit of a review, but we can go through it quickly. Remember that the normal movement for any unit is its M characteristics, movement characteristic. In this case, the High Elves, they have a movement of 5 inches, so that would be our normal 5-inch move. Remember, in addition, that units are able to move backwards, but they do so at half of their normal movement, rounded up. In this case, 2.5 rounded up would be 3 inches, so our normal backwards movement would be a 3-inch move like so. In addition, units are also able to move sideways at half of their normal movement. So once again, 2.5 rounded up would be 3 inches. This unit can move sideways up to 3 inches like so. And it is important to remember that because moving sideways and backwards are difficult movements, we can only do one or the other. We cannot do both. In addition, it is not possible to wheel when moving backwards or sideways. The wheel is reserved only for the forward movement. With respect to marching, remember that marching is simply double of the normal movement characteristic. For the High Elves now, this will be a normal characteristic of 5, so a march will be a massive march of 10 inches. It is important to note that marching units are unable to reform, and they are not allowed to move backwards or to the side. They, however, may wheel as normal when they march forward. In addition, any marching unit has to give up its shooting in the shooting phase, so keep that in mind when you move your units with missile weapons. Any unit desiring to march that is within 8 inches of an enemy must do what is called an enemy sighted test. In this case, we have the High Elves that are within 8 inches of the Goblins. If they would like to march in this direction, they will have to take a leadership test in order to do so. Let's roll this out, a leadership of 8. They pull it off with a 4, which means they can carry on with their march as normal. Were we to fail the enemy sighted leadership test by, say, rolling a 10, what that would mean is that this unit would be unable to march. It would only be allowed to move as normal, but it would still suffer all of the penalties that it would have incurred were it to have marched, such as not being able to shoot this turn. A couple words here about movement of lone models. Lone models move, wheel, march just like a larger unit. The one exception is that a single model is able to pivot on the spot as many times as it wishes over the course of its move. It can do so then without penalty, and so pivoting does not prevent models from marching or even from shooting later in this turn. Nevertheless, a lone model that does pivot does count as moving for the sake of shooting, so it will still incur the shooting penalty of -1 for movement. Despite this greater freedom that lone models have, they still must follow the same rules for charging. So what that means is that they are allowed one wheel of up to 90 degrees, in which they must move in a straight line, and then they are allowed to close the door like normal units would do. Finally, we may briefly discuss the reinforcements rule. Now, sometimes a unit will be called upon to enter the battlefield, either because it had been inadvertently gone off the battlefield in a charge pursuit, for example, or in this case of the dwarf miners here, they come out on the second round or later. What you do is you place their back end against the board edge and face them directly into the battlefield. Now, it's important to remember that a unit that enters as reinforcements cannot charge, as it has missed its opportunity to declare charges and may not march, but it can otherwise participate in the game normally. It's worth bearing in mind as well that units count as having moved for the purposes of shooting, so they will also incur a -1 penalty. As a way of introduction here, we may note that wizards are simply any of the models in your army that are capable of casting spells. To the left here we have a Empire Battle Wizard, and to the right here we have a High Elf Mage. When picking your list now, you'll be able to assign each of your wizards a level of 1 through 4. And this is important because the higher the level, the more power that the wizard has, both in casting and dispel attempts, and the more spells that the wizard will be able to have to bring into battle. Let's take a minute now and walk through the spell generation. Now, technically this should be done before the game begins, when you have your mages and you pick your lores. Then you can go ahead and you can roll out your different spells. In this case, I will show you what it looks like when we have a High Elf Mage here that is a level 4, and we are going to be using the Lore of Life. Now what you do is you take your spells and you lay them out according to the way they're listed in the book, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in addition, you have your signature spell here, which is Earthblood in the case of the Lore of Life. Now what you want to do then is you get to roll 1 die for each of the levels of your wizard. In this case, it is 4. So we will roll this out and assign 1 die to each of the numbers we roll. Now this is interesting because we rolled 3 2s and a 3, so we know for sure that we will get number 3, and we will get a 2. But now what is interesting, if you roll doubles of anything, or in this case triples, you can pick any spell that you want, because you cannot have multiples of the same spell. So in this case we can choose 2 of them ourselves, free choice. So we'll take the Dwellers Below, which is a good power spell, and we will take, let's take Regrowth. And an additional point you can make here is that you can then change out any one of these spells for the signature spell. You can always take the signature spell. In this case, just for the sake of this example, let's not use Flesh to Stone, but let's instead take Earthblood. So there you go. Here would be our 4 spells. We have the signature spell of Earthblood, Throne of Vines, Regrowth, and the Dwellers Below. There are our 4 spells for our level 4 mage. Let's back it up and do this one more time just to show you a different example. So here we roll this out. We have a 3, and we have a 4, and we have 2 5s. So once again, we can trade out one of those 5s. We will take Dwellers again. And I don't want the signature spell this time, so we will stick with that. Number 3, 4, 5, and the Dwellers. So there you go. To begin, we can just give a brief summary of the magic phase. We begin here, of course, by rolling for the Winds of Magic, and then we move on to casting a spell. Any dispel attempts, we then work out the spell resolution, and we move on to the next cast attempt if it is possible. Now what we will focus on here is the first part of this, and that is simply the roll for Winds of Magic. At the start of each magic phase, the casting player determines the strength of the Winds of Magic by casting 2d6. Let's do that now. And we roll a 5 and a 2. Now the 5 and the 2 is our base number that we will begin with. And what we may do then is attempt to channel. What channeling means is that each of the sides, in this case we have the High Elves with 2 mages, and we have the goblins over here with 1 mage. You are allowed now to channel an extra d6 for each of the wizards or mages you have. So in this case we have 1 over here and we have 2 over here. So channeling is successful on a 6, which means if you roll a 6 you get an additional dice in your pool. So let's roll this out. No success for the high elves, and over here for the goblins we roll this out. No success for the goblins. With no channels now, we are able to determine the power pool for the casting player and the channeling power dice for the dispelling player. The casting player's power pool now, in this case it is the high elves that are casting, it is their magic turn. They will get a total of 5 plus 2, 7 dice total. In addition, the dispelling mage over here, the goblins, will get the highest of the 2, so we will get 5 out of those 7. So here we now have the 2 power pools. On the left here, the high elves now have 7 dice to dedicate to casting, and the goblins have 5 dice to dedicate to dispel attempts. Were we so lucky now to roll these 2 numbers as our channel attempts, you notice here we have 1, 6, which is a successful channel. We would in fact be given 1 additional die, so we would be given 8 over here. And if we rolled a 6 for the goblins, they would also get 1 additional die. So they would have a total of 6. So we would then have 8 dice in the pool for the high elves and 6 dice in the pool for the goblins. It is important to note here as well that if the wizards are fleeing or not on the battlefield, they are not able to channel. One important point to note here is that there's in fact a power limit, a finite limit on the amount of power a wizard can control. What this means is that the casting player's power pool can never exceed 12 dice at any point in the phase. Any dice generated beyond this will be lost. So for example, if the high elves roll this as their winds of magic, double 6s, then we know that this is the highest that they can have for their power pool, which means it's not even necessary for us to attempt to channel with these 2. We cannot go above 12 dice. In addition, if for some reason the defending, dispelling wizard also gets 12 dice, that is also the limit for them as well. So neither side can exceed 12 dice, either in the casting dice or the dispelling dice. Direct damage spells are deadly attacks that strike the foe without warning. Direct damage spells can only ever be cast on enemy units. Sometimes a direct damage spell will use a template to determine which models are hit. When this happens, the template cannot be placed in such a way that it touches friendly units or enemy units that are in close combat. This is not to say that the template won't scatter onto friends later, depending on the spell. Here is a summary for the rules for direct damage. First, enemies must lie within the forward arc. Second, you do not require a line of sight. Third, you may not aim at enemies in combat. Fourth, you may not use it against friendly units. And fifth, you may use it against enemy units. As an example of a direct damage spell, we will be using the Dwellers Below from the Lore of Life. This spell has a range of 12 inch and casts on an 18 plus for the smaller version and a 21 plus for the large version. For this example, we'll use the High Elf Mage here, casting onto this unit of Skaven clan rats. As you can see, they are within their forward arc, and it is in fact an enemy unit. So we will throw 6 dice at it. Assuming we have 6 dice, we need an 18 plus to show a 14 here with our level 4. And we got it, no problem. Assuming now the Skaven do not dispel, they will need to take a strength test with 20 of their clan rats. Here we are now, strength of 3. They will be failing on 4s, 5s, and 6s. And 13 fails now, so we will take 13 guys off of this unit. 5, 10, and 3 more. So as you can see, a pretty devastating spell that the High Elves were able to use against the clan rats. Magic missiles are sorcerous projectiles that the wizard hurls at his foe. Magic missiles can only be cast on enemy units. Unlike other types of spells, magic missiles do require the wizard to be able to see his target. Accordingly, a wizard can only cast a magic missile at a target that lies within his forward arc and to which he can trace line of sight, just as if the wizard was firing a missile weapon. Magic missiles cannot be cast at all if the wizard or his unit is engaged in close combat. Magic missiles always hit their target automatically. Here is a summary of the rules for magic missile. First, enemies must lie within the forward arc. Second, you do need a line of sight on the enemy. Third, you may not direct magic missile against units in combat. Fourth, you may not direct magic missile against friendly units. And fifth, you may direct magic missile against the enemy units. As an example of a magic missile spell, we will look at the Fireball from the Lore of Fire. The Fireball has a range of 24 inches, and it is a cast on a 5+. Casting the spell now will be the High Elf Mage level 4 over onto this unit of clan rats, and we will throw 6 dice at it. And it goes off with Irresistible Force. In its small version, this now causes D6 Strength 4 hits, so we will cause 5 hits. Strength 4 against Toughness 3, we are now wounding on 3s. And there are 4 wounds. With light armor, we are unable to make any saves, so we will remove 4 of the Skaven from the back. Augment spells empower the caster's allies, protecting them with sorceress wards and magically enhancing their fighting prowess. Augment spells can never be cast on enemy units, no matter what benefit the player believes he might get. Augment spells can even be cast onto units in close combat to give them a much needed boost. Also, targets of augment spells need not lie in the caster's forward arc. Here is a summary for the rules for augment. First, the targeted unit does not need to lie in the forward arc. Second, you do not need a line of sight to targeted unit. Third, you may target a unit in combat. Fourth, you may target a friendly unit. And fifth, you may not target an enemy unit. As an example of an augment spell, we will use the spell of Flesh to Stone from the Lore of Life. It has a range of 24 inches and casts on an 8+. What it does is it adds a +2 to the toughness of the unit. For this example, we will have our High Elf Mage level 4 cast Flesh to Stone over here onto this unit of Swordmasters of Hoth who are fighting the Skaven clan rats. So here we go, we will throw 6 dice at it. And we get it with that roll. Assuming now that the clan rats are unable to dispel, we will place the Flesh to Stone card here next to our unit to show that it has successfully been cast. Hex spells are the counterpoint to augment spells, weakening the enemy and making them easier to slay. Hex spells can only ever be cast on enemy units. Hexes can be cast onto units in close combat. Targets of hex spells need not lie in the caster's forward arc. Here is a summary of the rules for the Hex. First, targeted units need not lie in the forward arc. Second, targeted units need not be within the line of sight. Third, you may direct Hex against units in combat. Fourth, you may not direct Hex against friendly units. And fifth, you may direct Hex against enemy units. As an example of the Hex, we will look at the Curse of Anraher from the Lore of Beasts. This has a range of 36 inches and casts on a 10+ in its small version. For this example, we will have the High Elf Mage level 4 here, directing it against this unit of Skaven clan rats. So we will throw 6 dice at it, and we need to show a 6, 10 total, and we got it no problem. Assuming the Skaven do not now attempt to dispel, we may place the card here to show that the spell was successfully cast, and now the Skaven have a -1 penalty to their hit rolls, and they treat all terrain as dangerous terrain, failing on a 1 and a 2. Magical vortexes or vortices are roiling globes of magical energy that travel across the battlefield, wreaking all kinds of unusual and often deadly effects. A magical vortex does not have a target. Instead, it uses one of the round templates, which is placed in base contact with the caster and with its center within the caster's front arc, and then moves as described in the spell. Unlike most other spells and other gaming effects that use templates in Warhammer, magical vortexes remain on the battlefield unless they move off it. At the end of every subsequent magic phase, each magical vortex moves in the direction and distance stated in the spell. If a magical vortex ever ends its move over a unit, place it 1 inch beyond the unit in the direction it was moving. Magical vortexes are always remains in play spells. Here is a summary of the rules for the magical vortex. First, the vortex must be placed within the forward arc of the caster. Second, the vortex must be placed within the line of sight of the caster. Rules concerning in combat, friendly, and enemy are not applicable to this spell. As an example of a magical vortex spell, we will use the Purple Sun of Zereus from the Lore of Death. This spell is cast on a 15+. In this case, we will have the High Elf Mage here, level 4, casting this against the Skaven Clan Rats. We can throw 6 dice at it now, need to show an 11 for a 15 total, and we've got it with no problem. The first step now is to place a small template in contact with the Mage, and nominate the direction in which we would like this to move. We will have it go directly towards the Clan Rats. And then we take an artillery die and we roll that and multiply this by 3. 3 times 8 is now 24 inches, which means that this template will move 24 inches forward directly through the Clan Rat unit, and we will be hitting all 20 of the Clan Rats as it moves to stop at its 24 inches. Clan Rats now taking 20 initiative tests, initiative of 4, so they will fail on 5s and 6s. And there we have 3 fails, so we will take 3 Clan Rats off of the back. Since this spell remains in play, in subsequent turns, it is now moved a number of inches equal to the artillery die in a random direction. For this example, we will be using the Dwellers Below from the Lore of Life, cast by our level 4 High Elf Mage. The first step now is to choose a target. In this case, we will have the level 4 Mage directing its cast against this unit of Empire Spearmen. The next step now is to make sure that it is possible to cast your spell. In this case, the Dwellers Below requires that we have our enemy unit in the forward arc and in our line of sight, and we do, with a range of 12 inches up here, and they are clearly within 12 inches. The next step now is to try and cast, and we will take the smaller version here, cast on an 18+. The larger version, if we want to move to 24 inches, would be 21+. Assuming now that we got 6 dice out of our roll for Winds of Magic, we will take between 1 and 6 dice to cast this. Judging because it is an 18+ casting value, we will throw all 6 of our dice at it. So here we go. Because we have a level 4, we need to show a 14. So let's roll this out, and we got it clearly with that roll. Adding it up now, we have a 5, 10, 16, 20, 24, plus our level 4, a total of 28. The spell clearly goes off. Of course, this means that this unit is now allowed to do a Dispel roll or to use a Dispel scroll. Were they not to do that, then this spell would have counted as successful. Were we so unlucky to roll 6 ones, we would then have a casting total of 10. 6 plus our level 4 equals 10. This, however, is not enough for the 18+ casting value for Dwellers Below, so our spell would then be unsuccessful. In this case, with an unsuccessful spell attempt, we have what is called broken concentration, and our level 4 may no longer attempt to cast any more spells during this magic phase. As a final note, we may point out that no matter how powerful a wizard might be, he or she cannot cast a spell where the total of the natural dice scores is less than 3. For example, were he or she to roll 1 dice and get a 1, 2 dice and get a 2, or 1 dice and get a 2. In this case, the wizard has broken concentration and may no longer cast spells during this magic phase. If 2 or more unmodified 6s are rolled when casting a spell, it has been cast with Irresistible Force. The spell will be cast automatically and cannot be dispelled, but the wizard then has to roll on the Miscast Table when the spell has been resolved. Consider, for example, the Dwellers Below. Were we to shoot for the small version of 18+ with our level 4 wizard, and were we to throw 3 dice at it and roll the following, a 6, a 6, and a 1, typically this would not go off because we would have 6, 12, 13 plus our level 4, which would be 17, which is not enough for the 18+. However, in this case, because we rolled 2 6s, this counts now as having Irresistible Force and goes off automatically. On the one hand now, this is a good thing because this wizard has now successfully pulled off his spell against this unit. The spell cannot be dispelled in any way, neither can a Dispel scroll be used against it. On the other hand, this is a bad thing for the wizard because now after the spell is resolved, the wizard will have to roll on the Miscast Table. Let us now follow out this example. The successful Dwellers Below means that we have 28 spearmen here that need to take strength tests with a strength of 3. That means we roll 28 dice, and on a roll of 4, 5, or 6, they are removed from play. A powerful spell with 15 of these guys dying, so we will take off 15 from the back row here. With that spell now resolved, this wizard will have to roll on the miscast table, so 2d6. That is a 7. You will consult the miscast table to see the effect of that. Having now rolled with Irresistible Force 2 6s, and having worked out the effect of the spell, it is time now to roll on the miscast table. The player now rolls 2d6 and consults the table to see the effect. There are 5 possible effects on the miscast table. The first one is the Dimensional Cascade on a roll of a 2 to a 4. The second is Calamitous Detonation on a roll of a 5 or 6. The third is Detonation on a roll of a 7. The fourth is Magical Feedback on a roll of 8 to 9. And the fifth and final one is Power Drain on a roll of 10 to 12. Let's walk through each of these in turn. On a roll of a 2 to a 4, on a 2d6, the wizard suffers the Dimensional Cascade. In this case, center the large template over the wizard. All models underneath this template, including the wizard, who is not given a lookout sir in this case, suffers a Strength 10 hit. Once that is resolved, then roll a d6. On a score of 3 or less, the wizard is cast into the realm of chaos. Remove him as a casualty. On a roll of 4 to 6, d6 dice are lost from the power pool instead. On a roll of a 5 to a 6 on 2d6, the wizard suffers a Calamitous Detonation. In this case, center the small template over the wizard, and every model underneath that template suffers a Strength 10 hit. In this case, it will touch all 10 of those models. The wizard himself is not allowed a lookout sir in this case. Additionally, d6 dice are lost from the power pool. On the roll of a 7 on 2d6, the wizard suffers the Detonation. In this case, all models in base contact with the wizard, friend and foe alike, but not the wizard himself, suffer a Strength 10 hit. Additionally, d6 dice are lost from the power pool. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 archers in contact with the wizard. On a roll of an 8 or a 9 on a 2d6, the wizard suffers a Magical Feedback. In this case, the wizard disperses the excess magical energy, but the feedback leaves him unable to harness the winds of magic for a time. The wizard and every model on the same side that can channel or generate power or dispel dice suffer a Strength 6 hit as a result of the magical backlash. Additionally, d6 dice are lost from the power pool. Finally, on a roll of a 10 or a 12 on a 2d6, the wizard suffers the Power Drain. The wizard's power level is permanently reduced by d3 to a minimum of 0, and he forgets a single spell for each wizard level he lost. The first is always the spell that was just miscast. Other spells lost are determined randomly. The wizard cannot attempt to cast further spells this phase. In summary then, having rolled double 6s for Irresistible Force, the wizard must roll 2d6 on the miscast table. A 2 to 4 is Dimensional Cascade, 5 to 6 Calamitous Detonation, 7 Detonation, 8 to 9 Magical Feedback, 10 to 12 Power Drain. If the wizard was able to cast his spell or her spell and it was not cast with Irresistible Force, the opposing player now has a chance to prevent the spell's effects by attempting to dispel it. Let's say, for example, that this level 4 cast Earthblood and did so with a roll of 12. A roll now of 4, 8, 12 plus the level 4 means that this spell was successfully cast with 16. In response now, this side must select one of its wizards to try to dispel. Now, any wizard anywhere on the board is able to carry out a dispel. You do not need to be within range, within line of sight. The wizard does not need to see the target or the caster. You simply nominate any wizard on the battlefield. Once we have now selected this wizard to carry out the dispel, we then need to choose a number of dispel dice. Let's say in this instance we have a total of 7 dice in the dispel dice pool. Unlike casting attempts, there is no upper limit on the number of dice that can be used in a dispel attempt, although you must roll at least 1. In this case, we will use all 7. So we will take all 7 of our dice and attempt to meet or exceed the roll of our opponent. So now we have rolled a total of 24 plus our 4 for our level 4, so 28. In this case, we have met or beat the casting value here, which was 16. So we may say that that spell has been dispelled. A few important points about dispelling. Were we to be so unlucky as to roll 7 ones, plus our level 4 for a total of 11, we would not have been able to dispel. In this case, the Dispel Attempt has failed. Furthermore, the wizard here is so preoccupied by his collapsing dispel that he or she is unable to attempt another dispel later in the phase. Second, just as when casting a spell, a total natural dice score of 1 or 2 is always considered to be a failure despite any modifiers. So whether we roll a 1 on a single dice, 2 ones on 2 dice, or a 2 on 1 die, this will always fail regardless of any bonuses or the level of the wizard. Third, if 2 or more 6s are rolled in a Dispel Attempt, the spell is dispelled automatically. In other words, it is dispelled with Irresistible Force. So in other words, regardless of any score over here, as long as this is not cast with Irresistible Force, any 2 6s will dispel automatically. In addition, if a player is called upon to re-roll the dice for any reason, it is the second result that stands as is normal for a re-roll. Note that a dispel that achieves Irresistible Force does not cause a miscast roll. A brief word about dispelling in armies. Were an army not to have a mage or wizard in their ranks, or were the wizard or mage unable to attempt a Dispel Attempt, the army is always able to attempt a dispel with the number of dice they have in their dispel pool. What this means, however, is that they get no modifiers as would a wizard from a wizard level. In addition, a special rule for dwarves. Even though dwarves have turned away from spellcraft long ago, as a result of this, there are no dwarf wizards, but their race has become highly resistant to magic. Accordingly, when a dwarf army attempts to dispel, the innate magic resistance of the dwarfs grants the army a +2 bonus to all dispel attempts. Were the Empire Battle Wizard here now to roll this for his attempt at Fireball, and were this to be the roll for the dwarves, we would say now that the spell is cast successfully and its effect is now resolved. Each spell in Warhammer provides all the information you need, so refer to that spell and its rules in order to see how to inflict hits or wounds or whatever else the spell calls for. If you are going to be looking for hits or wounds, you will resolve this in the same way that you do in the shooting phase on page 40. Quite a lot of spells inflict damage in one manner or another, and as with shooting attacks, if enough damage is caused, it can cause the enemy to flee from battle. So let's say that this unit of dwarves was hit by this spell and they lost over their 25%, in this case half of their warriors. They will need to roll for a panic test, and they get it with a 7, so they will be sticking around even though they took so much damage. Most spells are cast instantly and their effect is worked out at once. In this case, with Fireball for example, the spell has no further effect in the game until cast again. Some spells, however, last longer than this. Spells marked Remains in Play stay in effect indefinitely when cast. For example, the Purple Sun of Xereus is a Remains in Play spell. They only come to an end when the target is slain, or else the caster is slain, or the caster chooses to end the spell, which he can do at any time, or he leaves the battlefield. The wizard now can continue to cast other spells, but not the same Remains in Play spell in subsequent turns, as it requires only a little concentration to keep a Remains in Play spell going. If they are not dispelled immediately when they are cast, Remains in Play spells can be dispelled at any point during a subsequent magic phase using Dispel dice as normal, or dice from the power pool as if they were Dispel dice, if it is your turn. Remains in Play spells do not retain the energy of their casting, and so a wizard or an army does not need to beat the original casting dice roll if attempting a dispel in subsequent turns, even if it were cast with Irresistible Force. Rather, all that needs to be beat is the minimum casting value for the spell. So for example, the Purple Sun of Xereus casts on a 15 plus, and so this army would only need to roll a 15 plus. Let's say they throw 6 dice at it plus their 2. They would get it now with this roll. In this case, then the Purple Son of Zoraeus is removed from play. An important note, any wizard who fails to dispel a remains in play spell during his or the enemy's magic phase cannot attempt further dispel or casting attempts for the remainder of the phase. We can say that that wizard has lost concentration. Some spells do not specifically remain in play, but have effects that last 1 or more turns. Once in play, such spells cannot be dispelled and remain in effect even if the caster is slain or leaves the battlefield, unless the spell description specifies otherwise. Be sure just to read the spell carefully when you are casting it to see what exactly the spell does, whether it lasts more than 1 turn or whether it just remains in play. As a final word, we can say something about next spell. Now, wizards can cast spells in any order, and a player is free to switch between wizards at any time, provided that he or she does not do so until the casting of the current spell has been resolved. Remember that unless specified otherwise, each wizard can cast each spell only once per turn. So for example, if the Empire Battle Wizard casts Fireball, then he cannot cast another spell and cast Fireball again. Only 1 time per turn per wizard. When the casting player has finished all of his casting or her casting attempts, either because he or she has run out of power dice, or because he or she has no remaining or useful spells to cast, or if the wizard has lost concentration, broken concentration by failing to cast a spell, the magic phase ends and the shooting phase now begins. Some magic items, such as rings and amulets or certain troop types, have the ability to use a form of magic called a bound spell. Now, bound spells can be used even if the bearer has broken his concentration or if he's not even a wizard. In this case, we will have the captain of the Empire. A bound spell is cast just like an ordinary spell using dice from the power pool. The model may do so even if not a wizard. The required casting value is equal to the bound spell's power level. Now note that bound spells never benefit from any casting modifiers that the user might have, for example, wizard level or magic items and so forth. On the other hand, failing to cast the bound spell does not break a wizard's concentration, as using an item that contains a bound spell normally would not require anything more complex than uttering a single word of activation. For example, the captain of the Empire is going to use the Ruby Ring of Ruin, a magic item that contains the lowest level of Fireball as a bound spell of power level 3. Therefore, when the captain attempts to cast the spell, the casting roll must be equal to or greater than 3. He will throw 2 dice at it and he gets it with a double 6. Having successfully cast the spell with the Ruby Ring of Ruin, we now will roll for the Fireball spell against this unit of Dwarf Warriors, and we will roll a d6 for d6 strength 4 hits. So 6 hits, strength 4 hits. 6 hits, now wounding on 4s. And 4 hits, we have 5+ save for the heavy armor, 2 pass and 2 fail, so we will remove 2 off of the back. Now, were this spell not cast with Irresistible Force, bound spells are dispelled exactly as other spells. The dispelling wizard, or in this case the army, must equal or beat the casting result for a successful dispel. Let's say we rolled a 5 instead of a 12 here. With our army, we would have gotten that no problem, and it would have been dispelled. As with this case, a bound spell can be cast with Irresistible Force if we roll 2 natural 6s in our casting roll. The bound spell is then cast automatically and cannot be dispelled, but of course it causes a miscast. What happens now with a bound spell when there's a miscast depends on the nature of the bound spell. If the bound spell is contained within a magic item of some kind, in this case the Ruby Ring of Ruin, the item crumbles to dust and cannot be used again during the game. Do not roll on the Miscast table. If the bound spell, however, is an innate ability, such as those used by a warrior priest, for example, then the model simply cannot cast further bound spells during this phase. Do not roll on the Miscast table.
With the magic phase now completed, we may move on to the shooting phase. The first step in the shooting phase now is to nominate a unit to shoot. So what you will do is look at your units on the table and look at those who have artillery weapons and nominate them one at a time to shoot at the enemy. In this case, we will have the Empire archers firing onto the High Elf Silverhelms. Now, when you are selecting your units or your war machines, it is important to remember that to launch a successful shooting attack requires a degree of preparation, as most weapons take a long time to load or aim. As a result, a model that wishes to make a shooting attack must have had a relatively uneventful movement phase. Let me give you a few reasons for why you are unable to shoot with units when you are trying to nominate the unit that you want to fire with. First, a unit may not shoot if it marched in the preceding movement phase. Weapons will have been shouldered and ammunition secured while the unit advanced. So in this case, if the Empire archers had moved ahead in a march movement, they are unable to shoot at the Silverhelms. Second, a unit is not able to shoot in this shooting phase if in the preceding movement phase it had done any of the following. First, if it had reformed without a musician, it is unable to shoot. Now, if it had a musician and they pulled off a swift reform, they would be able to shoot. In addition, if the unit had attempted a charge but did not have a high enough roll to make it into combat, so that would count as a failed charge, they would not be able to shoot. And finally, if the unit had been fleeing for any reason and had rallied in the preceding movement phase, they would not be able to fire their weapons. Third, a unit is not able to shoot if they are fighting in close combat. Fourth, a unit is unable to shoot if they are fleeing. Such models are far more interested in saving their own skins than firing their weapons. Fifth, a model or a unit is unable to shoot if it is under the influence of a specific spell or special rule that prevents it from making a shooting attack. This is, of course, not a comprehensive list, and there may arise situations in which other rules prevent you from shooting with your artillery units. In those situations, just follow those specific rules carefully in order to carry out your shooting phase. With nothing hindering this unit of Empire archers from now firing, we may nominate this unit to fire here on this unit of High Elf Silverhelms. Once that shooting attack is successfully carried out, we may then move on to nominate a new unit, and in this way move through our shooting phase. Now that you have nominated a unit to shoot, and you have checked to make sure that nothing hinders them from shooting, it is time to choose a target for that unit to shoot at. Be careful now because all models in the same unit must shoot at the same target, so choose carefully. In this case, we will have the Empire archers firing here at the High Elf Silverhelms. In order now for your warriors to be able to shoot at your enemy, it is required that you are able to see your enemy. And we use two straightforward rules to determine whether or not an enemy can be seen. First, the target enemy's unit must lie at least partially within the shooting model's forward arc, just as if it would if your shooting model wished to declare a charge. In this case, the Silverhelms are fully within the forward arc using the right edge of the unit as our guide. Were the Silverhelms to be located here on the right flank of the archers, they would clearly be outside of the forward arc of the archers, and therefore the archers would not be able to shoot at them. Second, in order to shoot, the shooting archers here must be able to trace a line of sight to their enemy. In this case, there's nothing obstructing the line of sight, so the archers clearly see the Silverhelms and can shoot at them. Were the Silverhelms to be located behind hard cover, where you can see only their weapons sticking out in this case, we cannot trace a line of sight to the Silverhelms, and in this case, the archers are unable to fire at them. The rules given thus far allow for the front rank of models to shoot, but we also want to allow models in the second rank to shoot. Basically, they take aim over crouched or stooping fellows in the front rank. Therefore, models in the second rank can use the line of sight and the forward arc of the model directly in front of them for the purposes of all shooting attacks, including stand and shoot reactions. In simple terms then, this allows units to fire in two ranks. When you're setting up your shooting units, therefore, it is good to have units that have two ranks because both of those ranks will be able to fire. Models further back than the second rank of a unit, such as the third or fourth rank, are assumed to have their line of sight blocked by models further forward, and so will not normally be able to shoot. All missile weapons have a maximum range that indicates the furthest distance they can shoot. So for example, short bows can shoot 18 inches, bows can shoot 24 inches, and long bows can shoot 30 inches. A detailed summary of all the shooting weapons and their ranges can be found on page 88. Now, a model can normally only shoot at a target if it lies within its maximum range of the weapon it is shooting with. The one exception to this is when a unit stands and shoots. Here we assume that the charging enemy has entered the weapon's range before the unit shoots. In this case, if we assume that the Empire archers now are using bows, they have a maximum range of 24 inches. If we look here, they are at 10 inches distance from the silver helms, which means they are able to fire with their weapon's maximum distance. But not only that, they are within short range, less than half of the distance, 12 inches, of that weapon. All models in a unit have to shoot at the same target. Due to the relative positions of the shooting unit or the target, it might happen that some models in a firing unit can shoot the target, while other models in the unit cannot. In this specific case, this unit of Empire archers has 2 of its archers with their line of sight entirely blocked by this wall. In this case, we can say that only 8 of the Empire archers are able to fire onto the silver helms. Other situations that may prevent an entire unit from shooting include that the target may be out of the forward arc or completely obscured by terrain or other models for some of the unit, and sometimes some models in the shooting unit will be out of range of the target. In these situations, you're free to continue with the shot, but only those models permitted to shoot the target and that have it within their weapon's range will fire. Finally, models are not permitted to shoot at enemies that are engaged in close combat for the simple reason that there's too much danger of hitting a friend. So in this case, were the High Elf Silver Helms to be engaged in combat with this unit of Empire Archers, this unit of Empire Archers would not be able to fire at the Silver Helms. The reason you are not allowed to shoot into combat is simple. Remember that while a fight may look like 2 separate blocks of troops fighting head-to-head, in this case, it is actually a swirling melee where no one stays still long enough to offer a safe shot. This is actually a better representation of how a combat would actually play out, and as you can see here in this case, the risk of hitting your own troops is very high in such a situation. It is important to note, however, that some War Machine weapons, particularly those that use templates such as rock lobbers, can accidentally hit friends while aiming at the enemy. The key word here, however, though, is accidentally. You cannot purposefully aim a template so that some of your models will be hit. See page 108 for more details on War Machines. Once you have selected your unit to fire and you have made sure that it is possible for this unit to fire, you may now roll a d6 for each shot fired. In this case, we have 2 ranks of the Empire Archers for a total of 10 shots. Of course, not all shots have the same chance of hitting. Some warriors are simply better at aiming than others, as reflected in a higher ballistic skill. So what we need to do now is to pull up the characteristic profile for the Empire Archers, and when we do that, we see that the ballistic skill of the archers is a 3. In order to determine whether or not we will hit, we will need to pull up the shooting chart, in which we find the ballistic skill for the Empire Archer, in this case a 3, and we find the to-hit score, which corresponds with that, which in this case is a 4. Assuming all things being equal and there are no shooting modifiers in this shooting attack, we may now roll our 10 dice, needing 4s now to hit on the High Elf Silver Helms. So rolling out 10 dice. 4, 5s, and 6s are now hits, so we have an impressive 7 hits on the High Elf Silver Helms. Rolling to hit now is only the first step, and we will also need to roll to wound, which we will cover in a later 3-minute rules. Certain troops or individual models have a high ballistic skill, and therefore they have a to-hit score of 1, 0, or even a negative number, if you remember from the chart above. Of course, you cannot roll less than a 1 on a d6, so in Warhammer, a to-hit roll of a 1 on a d6 always fails, regardless of the dice modifiers and ballistic skill of the model. Raw skill is not the only factor to determine the difficulty of a shot. There are many other factors that may play into making a shot more difficult, and we consider these to be shooting modifiers. To continue with our example from the previous 3-minute rules, say this unit of 10 Empire archers were to fire on these silver helms, and typically because they have a ballistic skill of 3, they would be hitting on 4s. Now if this unit has a -1 modifier, that now means that they will be hitting on 5s, which will make their shot more difficult. And with 5 or 6s hitting, we have only 1 hit, so that one simple modifier can make a big difference. On occasion, shooting modifiers result in a required score of 7 or more. Despite this, it is still possible to hit the target. As it is impossible to roll a 7 or better on a d6, you will first need to roll a d6. Then for each shot scoring a 6, you need to roll a further score as shown on the chart included here. For example, were these Empire archers to require 8s in order to hit, we would need to roll 6s, followed by a second roll of a 5 or a 6. 1 6 that we now re-roll, and we got a 5, so 1 hit. A few of the standard shooting modifiers are as follows: moving and shooting -1, firing at long range -1, standing and shooting -1, target behind soft cover -1, and target behind hard cover -2. It is important to reiterate that the shooting modifiers are cumulative, which means that you need to add all of them up when figuring out your to-hit roll. So for example, if this unit of Empire archers had moved in the movement phase into this position in close range, but this unit of High Elf Silverhelms are behind soft cover, we would have a -1 modifier for the movement and a -1 modifier for the soft cover, meaning that these guys would go from hitting on 4s to hitting on 6s. And still with all of the modifiers, an impressive 3 hits. One exception to the cumulative rule comes in the case of cover. In this example, we have a hedge here, which is soft cover and provides a -1 shooting modifier. We also have a stone wall here, which is hard cover and provides a -2. Now, instead of adding these together for a -2 plus -1 for -3 modifier, we take the stronger of the two, which is the hard cover, and therefore we say that the High Elf Silverhelms have a -2 modifier for this cover. To reiterate now, we have several common shooting modifiers: moving and shooting for -1, firing at long range for -1, standing and shooting for -1, target behind soft cover for -1, and target behind hard cover for -2. Let's touch upon each of these in turn. First, moving and shooting. Models that move for any reason during the preceding movement or magic phase will have less time to aim, making their shots less accurate and thereby suffering a shooting modifier of -1. This of course applies to normal movement, but it also applies to a swift reform. If one has a musician and is able to pull off a swift reform, the unit is still able to fire, unlike a normal reform, but they still suffer the -1 modifier for moving. Second, firing at long range. Missiles lose power and accuracy long before they reach their maximum range, so any shots taken at an enemy that is further away than half the weapon's maximum range suffer a -1 shooting modifier. So for example, these Empire archers are shooting normal bows with a maximum range of 24 inches. That means anything beyond 12 inches is considered long range. In this case, they are at 12.5 inches, so they would be shooting at long range and thereby suffering a -1 shooting modifier. Third, standing and shooting. Having a bellowing enemy bear down on you while you're trying to aim is most distracting. Models that are making a stand and shoot reaction suffer a -1 to shooting modifier. Now in this case, we are not talking about the shooting phase of the Empire archers, but rather we are talking about the movement phase of the High Elf Silverhelms. The High Elf Silverhelms have just declared a charge against the archers, and the archers will now declare a stand and shoot. Because of the charge, which is a distraction and causes anxiety, the archers here will have a -1 modifier as they fire their missile weapons. If the majority of the models in the target unit is obscured from the shooting model's view by other models, friend or enemy, or by terrain, then an additional to hit modifier is applied. This will be classed as either soft or hard cover. This applies as well to single models in which more than half of the target model is obscured. In this case of the High Elf Silverhelms, we see that 2.5 of them are obscured by this hedge, so they would therefore receive the soft cover modifier. Now, were the unit to be located in this way, with 1.5 models covered, then they would not receive the soft cover modifier. It is common for some models in the firing unit to have something in the way and for others to have a clear shot. Where this happens, simply resolve the 2 sets of shots and thus the 2 sets of the hit modifiers separately. So in this case, we have these 2, 4, 6 archers have a clear unhindered shot at the High Elf Silverhelm, so no -1 modifier, whereas these 2, 4 total archers have their vision obscured by the hedge and therefore they suffer from a -1 modifier. In cases like these, it is helpful to roll different colored dice. In this case, we can roll the yellow dice for the 6 archers that have no -1 modifier, and we can roll 4 white dice for the archers that have the -1 modifier. So yellows would be hitting then on their normal 4s and whites on 5s. So a total of 4 hits and none of the modified shots were successful. Soft cover offers a little protection against missile fire, but its main advantage is to hide the target from view. Examples of soft cover may include hedges, fences, wagons, or other types of soft terrain. Hard cover represents cover of a more durable kind, like that offered by stone walls, stones, buildings, and other such hard structures. But we also count intervening units, whether a friend or foe, as counting as hard cover. And remember once again that these 2 types of cover do not accumulate. So either you have the -1 for the soft cover, the -2 for the hard cover, or in the case that you have both, you take the greater of these, the -2. Some unusual attacks, most commonly those made by magic missile spells, see page 31, hit automatically. Where this is the case, it is exactly how it sounds. Do not roll for the attack. It instead automatically causes the number of hits stated within the wording. Automatic hits. Some unusual attacks, most commonly those made by magic missile spells, see page 31, hit automatically. Where this is the case, it is exactly how it sounds. Do not roll for the attack. It instead automatically causes the number of hits stated within the wording. Examples of cover. If this were the model's eye view, then we could say the following things about cover. First, the High Elf archers are completely visible. There is nothing in the way and no cover modifiers apply. Second, the Prince on Griffin is more than half hidden by the building, so shots against it would suffer from a -2 penalty for hard cover. Third, similarly, the Illyrian Reavers would benefit from the -2 penalty for hard cover, which is the High Elf archers in this case. Fourth, the Sword Masters of Hoth, with a front rank of 5 models wide, are clearly more than half visible, and so do not benefit from cover. Fifth, although the majority of the High Elf Mage is visible, he is in base contact with a hedge, and so benefits from the special rules conferred by obstacles. For more on this, see page 122. This counts as soft cover. The close combat phase can be broken down into 4 sub-phases. First, fight a round of close combat. 2, calculate close combat result. 3, loser takes a break test. And 4, flee and pursue. Let's touch upon each of these briefly in turn. First, fight a round of close combat. When you now have your units into base-to-base contact, you need to ask some important questions. Who can strike? In this case, we have 2 rows here, and we have horses and we have silver helms. How many attacks? We need to add up the attacks. The striking order, which we follow based on initiative. Roll to hit, roll to wound, taking any saving throws, and then removing casualties. Second, once we have fought our combat, we then calculate the close combat result. You add together all of your combat bonuses from charging, banners, ranks, wounds, kills, etc. And then you figure out who the winner is. Third, the loser takes a break test. Once we have figured out our combat results now, we will take the loser. Let's assume it is the Empire Archers. They will take a break test and they will flee or they will remain. After that, then we have combat reform. Either and both have the opportunity to reform after combat. Fourth, flee and pursue. Assuming now that the Empire Archers have failed their break test from combat, we then need to go ahead and make them move their flee movement. Now before we do that, the elves here have the option to restrain or pursue. Once that is declared, we then go ahead and roll the flee distance here, and we roll the pursuit distance here. Now if this distance is equal to or greater than the flee distance, then we will say that these guys are then caught and we will remove them from the battlefield. If, however, the archers were not caught, we would be able then now to go ahead and move them their flee distance, and then we will move over here to the high elves. If they have tried to restrain, they may then attempt to restrain and reform if they would like. Otherwise, if they have not attempted to restrain, they will then have to move out their pursuit distance. All models that have now come into base contact with each other must now strike. Models cannot elect not to strike, nor can they normally be prevented from doing so. Who can strike? Models can fight if they are in base contact with an enemy model when it is their chance to attack, even if the model's bases only touch at the corner. In this case, we have the 5 dwarf warriors over here, and on this side we have the 7 Empire spearmen. As you can see, they are in base contact, and these 2 here on the edge are in base contact because their corners touch the corners of each of these warriors. As such, we can say that in this combat we have 5 dwarf warriors fighting and we have 7 Empire swordsmen. Were the contact to look like this with 4 swordsmen and 2 inner circle knights, we have a very interesting case here that these dwarf warriors now, this one right here and this one, are in base contact both with the swordsmen and with the inner circle knights. As such, these 2 dwarf warriors may choose which unit they would like to attack. The next step now is to find out how many attacks will happen in the combat. Typically, each one of these warriors will have only 1 attack, although some may have 2 or more. In this case, we have 5 attacks, 1 for each of these 5 warriors. Over here in this unit, we have 4 attacks, 1 for each of the swordsmen. Over here, we have 1 attack for each of the inner circle knights, and also 1 attack for each of the horses. In some special situations, it is possible to divide attacks. Let's say for this case that our dwarf hero here has 2 attacks. Now he is in contact both with the Empire swordsmen and with the inner circle knights, and as such, if he so desires, he may send 1 attack into that unit and 1 attack into that unit. Just be sure that you announce that you are going to be dividing your attacks before you roll any dice. Supporting attacks. Warriors in the 2nd rank do not sit idly by while their comrades battle away, but they also join the combat. A model can make a supporting attack if it is directly behind a friendly model that is itself fighting an enemy in base contact. So in this case of this combat, we have not only these 7 Empire archers who are engaged with these 5 dwarf warriors, but we also have the 7 archers behind them that can also join in the combat, for a total of 14 attacks. It is important to note, however, that in most cases, supporting attacks are only able to make 1 attack. So for example, if these archers indeed had 2 attacks each, we would have 2 attacks from each of those in the front rank and 1 additional attack from those in the back. And in this case, that would give us a total of 21 attacks. It is important to note, however, that supporting attacks can only happen to the front and not to the side or to the rear. So in this example where we have 5 dwarf warriors attacking in this combat, it is only these 2 right here who are able to attack, and these 2 are not able to provide supporting attacks. In the case of a horde formation, such as this horde formation of Empire archers, warriors in a horde can make supporting attacks from the 3rd rank, not just from the 2nd. And remember, the horde formation is any formation that has its front rank double what a normal formation would be. So in this case, not simply 5 models, but 10 models. In this combat then, we have the dwarves able to make 5, 10 attacks. And over here we have the Empire able to make 7, 14, and because it is a horde formation, 21 attacks. And to conclude, a word about incomplete ranks. Whenever units are in combat, they will always move those who are out of position into position to have the most models fighting. So for example, in this case where the Empire archers have charged into the flank of these warriors, these 2 warriors will slide over here across that rank in order to maximize the combat. And in this case where the Empire archers charge the dwarves into their rear, we notice that there are 4 spots here that are not filled. In that case, we just assume that these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 warriors will be those who will be fighting the archers. With our units in combat, we may now go ahead and strike blows. Blows are struck in initiative order, starting with the highest initiative down to the lowest. Initiative represents the speed of the warrior in battle. So in this particular instance, we have the dwarf warriors with an initiative of 2. They are quite slow. We have the silver helms of the high elves with an initiative of 5. And then we have the elven steeds with an initiative of 4. What this now means is that as we go through this combat right here, we will begin first with the high elf silver helms, followed by the horses, the elven steeds, and finally then the dwarf warriors will get to attack. Now this is important because given the higher initiative of the elves, they may be able to kill off a lot of these warriors, which may actually prevent them from attacking back. Let's go ahead now and just walk through how this combat could in fact look. We begin here now by rolling for the attacks of the silver helms. We roll for 4 attacks, and we'll say we hit and killed 2 warriors. They weren't able to make any saves. Second then, the next initiative is the horses, the elven steeds. So we have also 4 attacks there as well. Let's roll those out and we will say that we are able to kill 2 additional warriors. And finally now we have the dwarves with the lowest initiative of 2 because they are the slowest. They have 10 attacks coming back, and we will say that we were able then to kill 1 of those. Now once again, you can see why this is incredibly important. Were the silver helms and the horses able to kill, say, all but 1 of these warriors, unlikely of course, but were they able to do that, we would say that then we only have a single warrior who is able to attack back. So the quicker then to attack, the quicker to wound and kill, and the more you can weaken your enemy and prevent them from attacking back. Therefore, it is really good to have high initiative. For this episode, we have been looking at striking order based upon the base initiative values that you find on the characteristics profile of these different warriors. In this case, an initiative of 2 for the dwarves, an initiative of 5 for the silver helms, and 4 for the elven steeds. Of course, there are many other rules in Warhammer Fantasy that affect initiative order. For example, certain weapons, like great weapons, have a rule called always strikes last, in which the warriors who carry those weapons will always be striking last in combat. In addition, high elves have a rule called always strikes first, which means that they will always be striking first in any combat. Of course, we will touch upon all of these specific rules later on in this series. The most important thing right now to remember is simply this, that initiative value determines striking order in the combat. Start with the highest initiative and move to the lowest. In close combat now, there are really 2 important things we need to do. The first is we need to roll off to see if we hit the other warriors. And once we hit them, we then roll off to see if we can wound the other warriors, after which they can make saving throws for their armor saves or ward saves or any other saves. Right now, let's focus simply on the rolling to hit. In this combat now between the Empire Archers and the Dwarf Warriors, we will now be able to attack first with the Empire. They have an initiative of 3, and the Dwarf Warriors have an initiative of 2. So let's begin here. We get to make 10 attacks with the Empire Archers. Before rolling any dice, it is important that we look up and compare the weapon skills of each of these units. So for the Empire Archers, we have a weapon skill of 3, and the Dwarves are better warriors, so they have a weapon skill of 4. Once we know these values, now we may look at the to-hit chart. The first thing to do is to find the attacker's weapon skill on the left. In this case, we will say that the Empire are attacking now, and they have a weapon skill of 3. Then we find the target's weapon skill, in this case a 4, and we move to the place where those two converge. What we see here now is that in order for the Empire Archers to hit, they need to roll 4+. And 10 attacks on 4+. Not too bad then. We have a total of 4 hits out of 10. The very next step then what we need to do is to roll these to wound, and we will cover that in a later episode. Let's assume that we have rolled to wound now, and now it is the dwarf turn to attack back. So let's go compare their weapon skill to that weapon skill of the archers. So first of all, we find the attacker's weapon skill, a 4 on the left, and then we go to the point where it converges with the target's weapon skill of a 3. And what we see here is that we only require 3 pluses to hit. And that makes sense because they do in fact have a higher weapon skill. The dwarves are better fighters than these Empire Archers. And so now we are able to throw 10 dice, 10 attacks, hitting on 3 pluses. And with this we are hitting with 5 attacks. You can see in fact that a higher weapon skill did make a difference in this combat. It is sometimes the case that modifiers will apply to these to roll hits. Despite that, we may say that a natural dice of a 6 is always going to be a hit, and a natural roll of 1 is always going to be a miss. Although it looks like there are a lot of numbers here and this to-hit chart may look a little intimidating, there are in fact a few quick rules of thumb to help you determine to-hit rolls. If we look back at the chart, we see a clear pattern here. Models with equal weapon skills will always be hitting on rolls of 4+. So if it is a 3 against 3, it'll be a 4+, just as well as if it were a 7 against a 7. Furthermore, if the attacker's weapon skill is greater than the target's weapon skill, the attacker will always be hitting on 3+. So for example, a 4 against a 3 will always be 3+. 4 against 2 will be 3+, 4 against 1 will be 3+. And finally, if the attacker is attacking a target who has a higher weapon skill, the attacker will always need a 4+ to hit, unless of course the target's weapon skill is over twice that of the attacker. So for example, if the attacker has a weapon skill of 3 and the target has a weapon skill of 7, then the attacker will need 5 pluses. In summary then, the important numbers you need to be thinking about when rolling to hit are 3s, 4s, and 5s. Once we have rolled all of our rolls to hit, we now take successful hits and re-roll those dice for rolls to wound. So from our previous example, let's say that the Empire Archers had begun here and they had 10 attacks against the Dwarf Warriors and they successfully hit on 4 attacks. What we will want to do now is to roll all 4 of these again to see if they wound. The reason for this additional step is because not every hit actually leads to a wound. Some hits may in fact bounce off without causing any damage. Therefore, we need to roll in order to see if they do in fact cause a wound. Before we go ahead and roll our hit dice to see if they wound, we will need to figure out what we need to roll in order to be successful. In order to do this, we will need to compare the strength of the attacker versus the toughness of the defender or the target. And this makes sense because we are comparing how strong the attack is versus how tough the defender is. In this particular case now, we have a strength of 3 from the archers, and we have a toughness of 4 from the dwarves. With these strength and toughness values, we may now move to the to wound chart. Let's begin by locating the attacker's strength on the left, and we find the 3, and we move across until we come into contact with the target's toughness of 4. And what we see here is that when the archers are attacking the dwarves, they will need to roll 5 pluses in order to wound. So rolling our 4 hits now, 5 pluses, and we do not wound on any of those. Now let's jump ahead and go over to the dwarves and say the dwarves are attacking back. When we look at the dwarves' strength, we see they have a strength of 3, and the archers have a toughness of 3. With these numbers, then we may go back to the chart and find the 3 on the attacker's strength and move over until where it meets the 3 on the target's toughness. And what we see here is that we need 4 pluses to wound. So if we go back to our previous example where the dwarves had 5 hits, we can now roll off to see if they wound. They will be wounding on 4 pluses. So what we see here is that they have 1 successful wound. Of course, this is quite an easy example because in this unit, each one of these models has the exact same strength and toughness, and in this unit, each of the models has the exact same strength and toughness. Now, were we to have one model in one of these units, say this archer who had a different strength and toughness value, we'd have to roll separately those dice in order to take into account that difference. It is also important to point out here that in this example, we have been just comparing the base strength and toughness of the models. There are certain situations, however, where these may be slightly different. For example, dwarves very often use what are called great weapons, and great weapons give them an additional +2 strength. So when they're using great weapons, it's obvious that they are able to wound much easier. We will talk about these additional rules in later episodes. Important now to remember, however, is just to be able to compare base strength and toughness with one another when you are rolling to wound. And just as with the to hit chart, the to wound chart also has some rules of thumb that will help us to quickly figure out the to wound numbers we need to roll. So if we look back to the chart, the first thing we notice is that equal strength and equal toughness between the attacker and the target mean that you will always be hitting on a 4+. So if we are comparing 3 to 3, we see we need a 4+, 4 to 4, 4+, 5 to 5, 4+, and so forth. In addition, if the strength of the attacker exceeds the toughness of the target by 1 point, the attacker will need 3 pluses. If it exceeds by 2 points, 2 pluses. In contrast, if the toughness of the target exceeds that of the attacker by 1 point, the attacker will need 5 pluses. And if by 2 points, the attacker will need 6 pluses. In summary then, when we are rolling to wound, the important numbers to keep in mind are 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. As such, a 1 will always be a failure to wound. In the same fashion as in the shooting phase, once we have hit a target and have wounded the target, that target is then allowed to make a saving throw based on their armor or their ward save. Let's run through an example of how this might look. From a previous example, we had 10 of these archers who were attacking the dwarves. We had 10 attacks. Now let's say, just for this example, that we were able to successfully hit on 5, and of those 5, we were able then to wound on 3. What this means then is that the dwarves are allowed 3 armor saves. Now let's say for this example we have given them heavy armor, which gives them a save on a 5+. We can then go ahead and roll these 3 dice, and if they get a 5+, they have saved those wounds by their armor. And so there we have 1 successful save and 2 that were not saved with the armor, so 2 of these dwarf warriors are going to be then removed. And let's continue our example by moving over to the dwarves. Now the dwarves are attacking back with 10 attacks. Let's say that they were able successfully to hit on 8 because of their higher weapon skill, and they were then able to wound on 6 of those. So we now have 6 attacks, wounds that have gone through against the archers. What this means then is that the archers will be given a chance to make 6 saves. Let's say we have given them light armor, which gives them a 6+ save. We can go ahead and roll all of these, and on a 6+, they will save those wounds, and that was not too bad. They saved 2 of them, but still suffered 4 casualties.
Now, in order to keep this example simple, we have just used normal weapons from both sides, and therefore we have just used the strength 3 and the toughness 3 of the Empire. Now, were we in fact to have attacked here with great weapons, that would have given the dwarves not a strength of 3, but rather a strength of 5. With the strength of 5 then, the dwarves' wounds would have been far more devastating. As you can imagine, greater strength means more devastating wounds. In order to account for this, we have armor save modifiers. If you look at this chart, you will see that any attacks that wound with strength 4 or higher have to make an armor save modifier. So for a strength 4, the save modifier is -1, strength 5 -2, strength 6 -3, and so on. With a strength 5 attack with great weapons from the dwarves then, that would be a -2 armor save modifier, which would basically negate any armor save that the Empire archers would be able to make. What this means is that rather than being able to roll for their light armor, the archers would instead simply take all of the wounds that were inflicted on them. In the case of our example from before, that means we would lose 6 archers, which would be quite a devastating attack. So you can see the massive difference it makes when you have higher strengths with respect to armor saves. A second common type of save is the ward save. A ward save is any save that comes from the protection from a magical source. So for example, we may have this Empire mage who cast a spell over this unit that gave this entire unit a 5+ ward save. Now this is in addition to any armor saves that that unit may receive. So back to our previous example, even though these guys are attacking with great weapons, which negates their armor save, we would still be able to roll 6 dice in order to try and save those 6 wounds because of our ward save. So with a 5+ ward save, we can roll this out, and we were going to save now 2 more. And what that means then is we only lose 4 guys as compared to 6. And just to reiterate, any ward saves are in addition to armor saves. So if you're able to make an armor save, you take that first, and any failed saves there, you are then able to roll against your ward save. So essentially you have the possibility of 2 saves.
Casualties are removed from the rear rank, just like models killed by shooting attacks. Models that have stepped up to replace the fallen can fight, provided that their initiative step has not passed. With saving throws made or failed, we are now able to remove the slain. Close combat casualties are removed in the same way as shooting ones, and we will remove them from the back. Now let's use this example of the High Elf Spearmen versus the Dwarven Warriors. Let's say that the Dwarven Warriors have successfully killed 4 of these soldiers. Now the interesting thing about removing casualties is even though combat fighting happens in these first 2 ranks, we always remove from the back. So we would take these 4 of the elves and place them back behind the unit. Now the idea behind this is that in the battle, in the heat of the moment, all the troops are pushing forward to the front line, so there will always be soldiers that are filling the gaps as fallen soldiers are moved to the side. So in this respect, we will just remove the slain from the back rank. And you can see here in this example, if the unit is large enough, taking a large number of casualties will not change how many soldiers are able to attack back. So in this respect, we will have all of our attacks just like normal because we removed them from the back. The other soldiers have stepped in to fill in the ranks. It can happen that a model causes more casualties than it has enemies in base contact. The excess casualties are removed as normal from the unit as a whole, representing the attacker fighting over the fallen foes. So if we use this example of the High Elf Prince on Griffin, we can say that even though that this model is only in base contact with 3 of the dwarves, and if this model does, say, 6 wounds, we would still remove 6 from the back row to represent that the crush of bodies, dwarven bodies, are filling in those gaps as 1, 2, 3 are killed, 3 more fall in place, and 3 more are killed on top of that. So you will always be able, if you have the models in the unit, to remove them from the back. And it is a good idea not to immediately remove the models from the table, but to place them off to the side. As you see here, we place 6 dwarves back here that were slain and 4 elves that were slain. We will need to count these later on for combat resolution, and it's good that we're able to remember exactly how many wounds we have caused. Now that we have engaged in combat and have fought, this concludes what we call the combat round. At this point, it is time to determine who has won by looking at the total number of points that we have received in the combat. Once all of the models engaged in combat have fought, we are now ready to determine which group has won the combat. And we do that by adding up points for different bonuses based on different things that are occurring in the combat. And there are also a few extra bonuses that we will cover here. Wounds inflicted. After we have fought a combat, we have pulled our guys off that have been killed, and it's now time to count up how many points, how many wounds have been inflicted. In this case, we see that the dwarves have inflicted 2 wounds on these 2 guys, and the high elves have inflicted 3 wounds, 3 dwarves. Now let's say that one of these figurines is killed, and this figurine has more than 1 wound. Say it has 3 wounds total. Well, that would be removed, and that would count as a +3. So that would be 3, 4, 5 total points that go to the dwarves. With respect to this particular combat resolution, then we can say that the dwarves get 5 points and the high elves get 3. Second, 1 point of combat resolution is given to the unit that had charged into combat this turn. So in this case, the dwarves would get 1 additional point for charging the high elves. Third, if the unit has charged from a higher position on top of a hill down into a unit, it also gains +1 for the high ground. Fourth, were the unit to be attacking the other unit in the flank, either on the left or the right, they would receive a +1 combat result. So in this example, you see the dwarves are attacking the high elves on their right flank. Fifth, and similarly, if the unit is attacking the other unit in its rear, then that unit that is attacking in the rear gets a +2 combat resolution. So once again, the dwarves here are attacking the high elves on their rear, giving them a +2 combat resolution. Sixth, any unit that has a standard bearer in it also gets a +1 for that standard bearer. The high elf unit does not have a standard bearer, but the dwarves in fact do, so they would receive +1 bonus for their standard. Seventh, a unit also receives points for extra ranks. You gain +1 combat result for each extra rank with at least 5 models to a maximum of +3. So in this example, we see that the dwarves have 2 ranks of 5 models. This one is incomplete here with only 2, so they would receive 2 points. The high elves have 1, 2, 3, 4, but they can only receive a maximum of 3, so there would be 3 points to 2 points for our ranks. One interesting exception to the extra ranks bonus is what is called disruption. A unit does not receive combat result points for extra ranks as long as it is disrupted. But what does disrupted mean? Well, a unit is disrupted if an enemy is attacking it in the flank or rear, and that enemy unit has 2 or more ranks of at least 5 models. So in this case, we see here that the high elves are being attacked on its left flank, and this unit has at least 2 ranks of 5 or more models. So we would say that the high elves are disrupted, and therefore they do not get their +3 rank bonus. But the dwarves still get their +2. So you can see here a massive advantage of attacking in the flank or the rear. In addition to these 7 common bonuses, there are also 2 uncommon bonuses. The first of these is Battle Standard. If the unit has the Battle Standard with it in its unit, so not a normal standard, but the special Battle Standard, then they receive +1. So in this case, the High Elves are carrying the Battle Standard in this rank right here, so they would receive an additional +1. The second bonus has to do with Overkill. There's a +1 combat result per excess wound caused in a challenge to a maximum of +5. Overkill applies when we have made a challenge. Let's say this high elf now comes and makes a challenge on this dwarf. They are both leaders in their unit. We'll say for this sake, each of them have 2 wounds total. Now let's say that the dwarf doesn't do any wounds in the challenge, but the high elf comes back and actually does a total of 5 wounds. So 5 wounds would be enough to kill the dwarf. But in addition to that, there is overkill because he did 3 additional wounds above and beyond the 2. So that means the high elf would gain 3 points for the overkill. And the idea here is that if you are killing the leader of the opposing unit with such force and brutality that you have overkill wounds, that will affect the unit in a very detrimental way. To summarize now, we add together all of the bonuses, and the side with the highest number is declared the winner of this combat. And here once again were the bonuses. First, wounds inflicted, +1 for each wound that you have inflicted. Second, if you charged this round, you gain +1. Third, if you charged from the high ground on top of a hill, then you gain also +1. If you were attacking a unit in the flank, you gain +1. If you're attacking a unit in the rear, you gain +2. If you have a standard bearer, that is a +1. And you also gain a +1 for each extra rank with 5 or more models to a maximum of +3. Now this last one doesn't apply if your unit is disrupted, and that means it is being attacked in the flank or the rear by another unit with at least 2 ranks of 5 models. In addition, we have 2 uncommon bonuses. If the unit has the battle standard, that is a +1, and also any overkill in a challenge gives you a +1 up to additional 5 points. With all of those bonuses added up, we are now ready to see who the winner is, and the loser will have to take a break test.
For this example, we will walk through a simple combat with these dwarf warriors and the high elf spearmen. Moreover, although combat resolution is calculated at the end of combat, we will be doing it with each step of the combat. On their turn, the dwarf warriors declare a charge against the high elf spearmen, and they are charging downhill, so they receive 1 point for charging and 1 point for charging downhill. For the sake of this example, we will say that the warriors have successfully rolled their charge and now move into position. Combat is carried out as normal, with each of the side inflicting 2 wounds, and each of those figurines has a single wound each. So in other words, they have made 2 kills, 2 wounds on each side. With those casualties now taken out, we see that the dwarves have a total of 4 points, and the high elves a total of 2 points. We can go ahead now and count up banners. We see that the warriors have a normal banner, and the high elves do not have a normal banner, but they do have a BSB, a battle standard bearer. So each of them will receive 1 more point. There are no flank attacks, no rear attacks, and no overkill points. So we can now move on to count the number of ranks beyond the first rank that have 5 or more models. The dwarves have 2 ranks, giving them 2 additional points, bringing their total up to 7. In addition, the high elves have 1, 2, 3, 4, but a maximum of 3, bringing their total up to 6 points. And with that, we come to the end of combat resolution, with the dwarves winning with a total of 7 points, the high elves 6 points. Although the dwarves have won this combat at 7-6, the high elves have more ranks than the dwarves, and therefore they have the steadfast rule. We will return to this rule in a little bit. The losing unit in a combat must pass a leadership test or flee. This break test is modified by the amount by which the unit lost the combat, unless, of course, the unit that lost is steadfast. To show you this rule, let's use the example that we've used previously of these dwarf warriors and the high elf spearmen. We'll give you 2 examples, one in which the high elves are not steadfast, and one in which the high elves are indeed steadfast. Here's the setup for the break test rule without the steadfast rule involved. As you can see here, each of these units has 2 additional ranks to the first rank of 5 or more models, meaning that they are tied in the number of ranks that they have, and that means that the high elves will not get the steadfast rule. A break test is simply a leadership test that has been modified by the results of the combat. In this case, the dwarves beat the high elves 7-6, which means that the high elves have to modify their leadership by 1 point, the difference in the combat. So their leadership goes now from an 8 down to a 7. That means we have to roll a 7 or less in order for them to stay put and not flee. And here goes our leadership roll for the high elves. And it is a 9, so they have failed their leadership test. They will turn around and flee. Had the high elves rolled a 7 or less, they would have stayed put for a future combat in the next round. And here now you see the setup when our steadfast rule is in play. You can see that the high elves have far more ranks than the dwarves, so even though they lost this combat 7-6, they are now able to roll on their unmodified leadership of 8. And rolling a 4, that is 8 or less, so they stay put for another combat. It is important to note that the steadfast rule here that the high elves are using is still in play even if they are attacked in the flank or the rear. That they are attacked in the flank or the rear does not negate the fact that the High Elves have more ranks and more bodies in their unit, which gives them the confidence they need to remain firm and roll on their unmodified leadership. If a unit rolls double ones for its break test, it passes the break test regardless of any other modifiers. Occasionally in the middle of a battle, even the humblest regiment becomes filled with steely courage and discipline, deciding to stand their ground no matter the odds, and double ones is used to represent that. Let's go back to this example of the dwarves beating the High Elves 7-6. In this case now the dwarves have steadfast, so they will be rolling on a leadership of 8. Even in this situation, were they to roll double ones, they would automatically pass their break test and stay put. On some occasions, however, double ones insane courage is the only way for a unit to avoid an inevitable flee. For the sake of this example, let's say that the High Elves are not steadfast and that for some reason they lost this combat 12-1. They lost by a massive 11 points. Now an 11-point loss would modify the High Elf leadership of 8 down to a -3. Obviously, they cannot roll a -3. This is going to be an automatic flee. However, they are given one final chance for insane courage. If they roll double ones in this situation, they will remain firm in place. Otherwise, they will flee. And this is the beauty of insane courage. No matter how horribly a combat goes for you, there is still a possibility, a tiny possibility, that the unit may nevertheless roll and pass its leadership with insane courage and not flee the combat. Inspiring presence. Now this is the benefit that you have of having your general close to your unit that is in combat. Providing that the general's not fleeing, all friendly units within 12 inches use the general's leadership instead of their own. For this example, let's say that this figurine over here is our High Elf General. Now the General is within 12 inches of the unit that was defeated, so the unit is now able to use the General's leadership score for their break test. In this example, we will say that this General has a leadership of 10. Now we need to go back to the combat resolution, and we see here that the High Elves still lost by 1 point. They are not steadfast, so the new modified leadership from the General goes from 10 points down to 9. The High Elves need to roll a 9 or less. And we rolled a 9, so because of the General's inspiring presence, that unit of High Elves remains in place. One additional rule to inspiring presence. If your general is in fact a large target, like this Prince on Griffin here, then the range for inspiring presence moves from 12 inches up to a maximum of 18 inches. So you see here now that this general is pretty far away, about 16 inches away, but because it is a large target, it is able to provide that unit with the general's leadership.
Assuming that a unit doesn't flee the fight, its leader can attempt to bring more warriors to bear against the foe. This, of course, is far easier for the winning side as they have sufficient momentum, but a disciplined unit can manage this even if on the losing end of a combat. For this example, we will say that the dwarves have won this combat, which makes them victorious, and now they're able to make a reform for free. In this case, they definitely want to reform because they have been attacked on their flank, and they want to turn now and face the enemy. One special restriction to this rule is that it cannot be used to get a model out of base contact with the enemy if that model was in contact before the reform was made. In this case, all of the warriors are all the same and they are put back into combat, but say we had a character in here, we cannot reform to move the character out of combat. Reforming amid defeat. Let's change the situation now and say that the High Elves have been defeated and they are now being attacked in their flank. And for some reason now they want to reform after having lost the battle. To do so, the High Elves will need to pass a leadership test to muster the necessary discipline to alter its formation. Now, this leadership test is subject to any modifiers from the fight that had just happened, and if the unit is in fact steadfast, it can roll on its unmodified leadership. In this case, the High Elves are in fact steadfast, so they will use their leadership of 8. Therefore, they need to roll an 8 or less to be able to reform. And there is a 9. They failed their leadership test, which means they have to stay in place. Were the High Elves to roll an 8 or less, they would then be able to reform. And once again, the leadership test will be modified from the combat. So were the High Elves to lose by 2, their leadership would drop from an 8 to a 6. In order to reform, then they would need to roll a 6 or less. And finally, a couple of unusual situations. If both sides wish to make or attempt to make a combat reform, take any leadership test required in order to make the reforms, then roll off to determine which side makes all of his reforms first. The winner of the roll decides. So in this case, with a 5 to a 2, the dwarves will be able to make their reforms first. In addition, if a unit is engaged to more than one facing, in this example the dwarves are engaged both on the flank and the rear, then this unit cannot make combat reforms. If a unit fails its break test, it must flee and might be destroyed as it runs. Oftentimes it is here that the most devastation happens from combat. For this example, we will say that the High Elves have failed their break test and are now forced to flee. Although the High Elves are forced to flee, the victorious unit can now choose to either pursue or to restrain pursuit. Having been victorious, the dwarves now are frothing at the mouth to run down their enemies as they flee. In order to prevent this, we need to roll a leadership test for them to restrain from pursuing their enemies. In the case of the dwarves, we have a leadership of 9, so a 9 or less will allow them to remain in place. And there is a 10. 10 is a failed leadership roll, and therefore, regardless of how restrained they want to be, the dwarves will chase after their high elf enemies and try to run them down. Were the dwarves to have rolled a 9 or less, they could stay in place. And sometimes remaining in place is the best strategic option for combat. With the intentions of the victorious unit declared, it's time to see just how badly the losing unit wants to escape and calculate the distance it flees. Fleeing units do not move their movement distance, but instead roll a 2d6 to show that their fleeing is rather random. Other kinds of models or units may in fact roll 3d6, for example, cavalry that has the swift stride rule, but for most infantry you will roll 2d6. And in this case, the High Elves will flee a total of 10 inches. Having rolled the dice for the fleeing unit, we may now roll the dice for the unit that is pursuing. In this case of the dwarves, we will be rolling 2d6. A roll of 6 by the dwarves is not enough to catch the fleeing unit, and therefore we may move on to moving the fleeing and pursuing units. Were the dwarves, however, to roll equal to or greater to the number of the fleeing unit, in this case a 10 or above, the dwarves would then cut down the fleeing unit where they stand, and the fleeing unit would be removed from the game entirely. In reality, not all the fleeing troops will have been slain, but any who survived will be so broken in spirit that there's no chance of them fighting again this day. Fleeing units turn around to face away from the victor and then move directly forward a number of inches equal to their flee roll. So in this example, we will say that the High Elves are fleeing a total of 8 inches. The first thing that we need to do is to turn them around in the center and face them directly away from the enemy unit and then move them their 8 inches. Remember that fleeing units are assumed to run around, force their way through, or otherwise avoid other units in impassable terrain in their desperate flight. We will come back to some of those rules in a little bit. Assuming that the pursuers have not rolled higher than the fleers, the pursuers may now move their total inches. In this case, we will say that the dwarves have rolled a 7, which will move them close to the High Elves, but not enough to run them down. Were the pursuers to pursue across unobstructed ground, such as in this example, they will move their full pursuit movement. Were they, however, to run into obstacles or other hindrances, their pursuit may come up short. Pursuit into an obstruction. Unlike fleeing troops, pursuers maintain some manner of order and formation. Therefore, if the pursuit move would take the pursuers into contact with or through a friendly unit or area of impassable terrain, they automatically halt 1 inch away. For this example, let's say that the High Elves are now fleeing through this dangerous terrain, this rock outcropping, impassable terrain. They will have to take dangerous terrain tests as they flee through it. However, the Dwarves, if they have sufficient amount of movement, will stop 1 inch away from it. Pursuit into a new enemy. If a pursuit move would take the pursuer into contact with an enemy unit, then the pursuers must charge the enemy unit. So once again with this example, the High Elves are fleeing past their general, and the Dwarves will be pursuing, and they have enough distance to actually come into contact with the general, so they will have to charge the general. Several quick points about this move. You notice how when the Dwarves charged into the new enemy, they in fact had to make a wheel movement and go directly into that enemy unit, maximizing their ranks. Let us show you how that looked again. In this case, the charged unit, the General on Griffin, is taken by surprise by this impromptu assault, and it is not allowed to take any charge reactions and must hold. Were this enemy unit, the General on Griffin, already engaged in close combat, and that fight has not been resolved for this turn, then the pursuing unit will get to fight another round of close combat. Were the Dwarves to win this combat, they however would not be able to continue to pursue this turn. They have already run enough and they are tired. Were the unit charged, this Prince on Griffin, already in combat and combat has already been resolved, then the Dwarves must wait until the next combat phase in order to fight. One benefit of this, however, is that in the following turn's combat phase, the pursuers, the Dwarves, will still count as charging and therefore get the charging bonus. In the case that this would lead to charging on both sides, simply count the charge benefits like normal. In some cases, the pursuers might even run into fleeing foes. In this case, we'll say that the Prince on Griffin is already fleeing. In this case, the Prince on Griffin cannot take any charge reactions, move the pursuers into contact with this unit as you would for a unit completing a charge against a fleeing unit. And this unit is then immediately destroyed, and the pursuing unit is allowed one final reform. If the victorious unit charged into combat and the enemy was wiped out, it can move 2d6 inches straight forward. In this example, we will say that the Dwarves have charged the High Elves. In addition, although this is highly unlikely, let's say for this example that all the High Elves were killed in combat, and that is in combat, not in flee pursuit. With such a powerful charge and combat, the Dwarves are able to make an overrun move. This represents the unit surging forwards, hungry to find more enemies to fight. An overrun is essentially a special pursuit move. When making an overrun, the victorious unit moves 2d6 inches directly forwards as if they were pursuing a fleeing enemy to their front. In the case of other units and Swift Stride, this may be 3d6 instead of 2d6, but for the Dwarves we will roll 2d6. Total of 6 inches. Pursuit off the battlefield. A pursuing unit that moves into contact with the battlefield edge moves off the battlefield. They're so caught up in their pursuit of the foe that their momentum carries them clean off the battlefield. Unlike troops fleeing the battlefield, however, such pursuers are good and keen to come back to the fray. Accordingly, we allow them to re-enter the board in their next movement phase using the rules for reinforcements on page 27. As such, the unit is placed back as close as possible to the same point from which it left the battlefield in the same formation. And remember that it needs to face directly towards the battlefield and have all of its rear rank touching the battlefield edge. It's often a good idea to leave a model from such a unit in order to mark the position from which it left the battlefield. It is possible, and indeed rather likely, that more than 2 units can become involved in the same close combat. A multiple combat is a fight that involves more than 1 unit on either or even both sides. Now, bear in mind, unless otherwise stated, all the rules for a one-on-one close combat also apply to a combat with multiple units on each side. With respect to multiple combat results, combat resolution works slightly different in a multiple close combat. All the casualties inflicted by both sides, including overkill bonuses, count towards the result as normal, but most other modifiers have limitations. Let's look at this example of the High Elves here who are in combat with the Dwarf Warriors and the Dwarf Thunderers. To begin, let's look at casualties inflicted by both sides. Here we see that the dwarves have been able to actually kill 4 guys, doing a total of 4 wounds. We see over here, in addition, that the dwarves have suffered 3 casualties, giving 3 points to the High Elves. With respect to standards, in a multiple close combat, you receive +1 combat result if your side has 1 or more standards present in the fight. So you do not gain a +1 for each standard, but a maximum of +1 for your standards. In this example, the dwarves are the only ones who have a standard. Similarly, your side receives a combat result bonus based on the best rank bonus in the fight, not the total rank bonus. So once again, in this example, the Thunderers do not have a complete rank here. The Warriors do in fact have 2 full ranks, and the Elves have 4, to a maximum of +3. So the Elves will gain 3, and the Warriors will gain 2. Bonuses for flank and rear attacks can only be earned once per unit attacked in the flank or rear. Having multiple units attacking the same unit does not grant additional bonuses. So in this case, the Thunderers are attacking on the flank of the High Elves. Were there to be another unit of dwarves on the flank of the High Elves as well, either on this side or on this side, you would still only get the bonus for 1 flank, in this case, +1. In a multiple close combat, you receive +1 combat result if your side has 1 or more units that charge this turn. Let's say for this example that both the Thunderers and the Warriors charge the High Elves. They, however, will only receive +1 for the charge, even though 2 units charged in this round. And finally, the High Ground. The combat result for charging downhill can only be counted once, by the side with the highest charging unit. That is, the one that started the turn highest up. In this case, we can say that the Dwarf Warriors charge from on top of this hill, coming down into combat with the High Elves, thus gaining a +1. Were other units to do that as well, we would still only get a +1 for this combat resolution. And with this, we see the combat result. The dwarves have won with 10-6. With a difference of 4, we now need to go ahead and roll to see if that elf unit will stay. That elf unit, as it stands right now, is steadfast, so it will roll on its normal leadership of 8. Let's say, however, that there were another unit involved and they were not steadfast. That unit, as involved in the combat, would have to then roll on its modified leadership, in this case, of a -4, so a total of 4. Let's give a few more concrete examples of multiple close combats. In this case, if 2 units of dwarves are attacking a single unit of elves in the same or both flanks, then they would only receive +1 combat result. If, in this case, 1 unit of dwarves is attacking the rear and the other is attacking the flank, the dwarves would then receive a combined combat result bonus of +3. So that is +1 for the flank and +2 for the rear. If the 2 units of dwarves are attacking 2 different units of High Elves in the flank, so in this case the Spearmen and the Prince on Griffin, and these High Elves were all part of the same multiple combat, then the dwarves would score +2 combat result. That is, +1 for each flank attacked. Multiple combats and break tests. All units on the defeated side must take a break test. When the winning side has been determined in a multiple combat, you need to take a separate break test for every unit on the losing side, using the difference in the 2 combat result scores as normal. For the sake of this example, let's say that the High Elves actually won this combat against the 2 dwarf units, and let's say that the High Elves won 3-2. Now, each of these units needs to roll with a modified leadership from 9 down to 8. The reason for this modified roll is that the dwarves are not steadfast. Now, any unit on the losing side can use its unmodified leadership for break tests so long as its number of ranks is higher than that of any of the enemy units in close combat. But as we see here, the warriors have only 3 ranks. Rolling for the dwarves, starting with the thunders. And that will be an 11. Second, the warriors. And that will be a 6. So as far as these break tests go, we have the thunders fleeing and we have the warriors staying put. An important note on Steadfast is this. You must go unit by unit to determine whether a unit is steadfast or not. So if we look at this example, we'll say that the High Elves in fact won this combat. But we see here the Dwarf Warriors have 1, 2, 3 ranks. The High Elves only have 2. So in this case, we would say that these Dwarf Warriors are in fact steadfast, allowing them to roll on their normal leadership of 9. However, the Thunderers only have 1 rank. They are therefore not steadfast, and they will need to roll on their modified leadership. Multiple combats and pursuit. It can happen that one or more victorious units have defeated several enemies that were engaging them from different sides. When this happens, bear in mind the following points. First, pursuit. Units on the winning side are each only permitted to pursue a single enemy unit that they are in base contact with, and declare this before any flee rolls are made. So in this example, we will say that the High Elves have won this combat. Now before flee rolls are rolled, we can say that the Spearmen will choose to pursue these Thunderers if needed, and that the Prince on Griffin will pursue these Warriors if needed. Were it to be the case after our flee rolls that the only unit fleeing is the Dwarf Thunderers, and that the Dwarf Warriors are in fact remaining in place, then we would have to say this: the High Elves would be unable to pursue these Thunderers, as they would remain in combat with this unit. Were it the case that these Dwarf Warriors were to flee from this combat, in which they were engaged with both the Spearmen and also the Prince on Griffin, then the High Elf player can decide which of the 2 units they want to choose to pursue first. In this case, the High Elf player may first nominate the Griffin and then the Spearmen, and if the Griffin has Swift Stride, 3d6 in pursuit, and also 2d6 to the Spearmen. Pursuit must be declared before either is rolled. Now, the benefit of pursuing with multiple units is that in case one unit misses, the other unit may be able to catch up. But also there is an advantage of remaining back in the place that you are and not pursuing and letting only one unit chase down the enemy. And that decision on what should be done will be based highly on the context and the strategy of that particular moment in the game. Fleeing units must roll greater than the scores rolled by all of their pursuers in order to get away. If even one of their pursuers equals or beats the fleeing unit's score, then the fleeing unit is cut down and the models are removed as casualties. So in this example, we see that the dwarves who are fleeing have rolled a 6. The Prince on Griffin unfortunately rolled a 3, so he will not be able to catch the pursuers. However, the Spearmen rolled a 7, and they will be able to catch the fleeing dwarf warriors and cut them down. A note on direction of flight. Where there is a choice of foes to flee from, warriors will always be more determined to avoid the most numerous enemy. The controlling player decides the order in which units flee. Let's say in this example that the High Elves have been defeated by the Dwarves, and the High Elves have failed their leadership test, and they are now going to flee from the battlefield. Now they have 2 units that are against them. Over here we have the Warriors with a 3 rank bonus, and over here we have the Thunders with only 1. In the case that this is the more numerous unit, the High Elves will turn in place and flee away from them in the direction of the Thunderers. As in this example, you see that the unit of High Elves were actually fleeing through the unit of Thunderers. In this case, every model in the unit that has fled through the enemy models will have to take a dangerous terrain test. In this case, the High Elves will need to take a total of 29 dangerous terrain tests. On a 1 on a d6, the model suffers 1 wound with no armor saves possible. So a total of 3 wounds suffered, 3 figurines taken out of that unit as they flee. Direction of pursuit. Once all flee moves have been resolved, resolve any pursue moves one at a time. In an order chosen by the controlling player, each pursuer pivots about its center so that it is facing directly towards the fleeing unit of its choice, and then pursues as described earlier. First, let's move the High Elves. First, we nominate the Thunderers on the left and roll off. Let's say that they don't have enough actually to run them down, but they get close. Let's first pivot them and then move them. In addition, we had also nominated our Dwarf Warriors to attack or to pursue. Unfortunately now, we have another unit that is in the way, so this unit in its pursuit roll will come up short and have to stay 1 inch away from its own unit. So to summarize then, the High Elves are forced to flee because they failed their leadership test, and the Dwarf player now says that they will have both of their units pursue. Unfortunately, the Thunderers rolled very low, so they were unable to actually run down the High Elves, and because they got in the way, then the second roll was not able to connect with the Dwarf Warriors. Occasionally, a situation can arise when one or more units are no longer in base contact with the enemy, but at least part of the enemy unit is still alive. For example, consider this combat where the High Elves are being attacked in the front and the flank by the Dwarves. After several rounds of combat, perhaps the High Elves have lost a rank and a few more figurines, which would leave then the Dwarves, the Thunderers, out of combat with them. Clearly this is wrong. Just as warriors on a real battlefield would push on to continue the fight and would not stop fighting if the enemy was standing a few paces away, so must warriors on the miniature battlefield. Whenever a unit becomes stranded in this manner, the attacking unit is immediately nudged by as small an amount as possible to bring it back into contact with the foe. No more foes. In multiple combats, it can sometimes happen that at the end of a round of close combat, some units are no longer engaged with any enemy unit. So in this case, we can say after this combat, the Prince on Griffin is actually destroyed and taken out of combat, leaving those Dwarf Thunderers to the left by themselves. Units such as these Thunderers on the left are out of combat for all purposes and can move normally from then on. Any combat result points that unit would have added to the fight for wounds inflicted are still counted for the fight's overall combat resolution, but other bonuses such as standards, charges, and so on are not. Note that such a unit cannot cancel out steadfast in an enemy. Panic deals with the psychology of warriors. Faced with allies and comrades being slain at the hands of the foe, you may find that your warriors scatter and leave the battlefield rather than fight on. In Warhammer, we govern these situations and the likelihood of them occurring with the rules for panic. A panic test is simply a leadership test, as described already on page 10. If the test is passed, everything is fine, but if the test is failed, the unit will immediately flee, as described here. It's important to note that a unit only needs to take one panic test in each phase. So in the movement phase, or the magic phase, or the shooting phase, or the close combat phase. Even if there are multiple reasons to take panic tests in a single phase. So only one panic test per phase. Most panic tests are taken immediately. And if you have 2 or more units that need to take panic tests, you as the controlling player get to decide which unit takes the first panic test, followed by which unit takes the next, and so on and so forth. It is worth noting, however, that there are 3 circumstances under which even the most cowardly of units are not forced to take panic tests. First, a unit does not take panic tests if it is in close combat. The immediate fray blots out all other events going on around them. So, for example, neither this unit of dwarves nor this unit of dwarves would need to take a panic test if something happened around here that would trigger it. They are both in combat at this point. Second, a unit does not take a panic test if that unit is already fleeing. Fear has already lent wings to these warriors. The prospect of further jeopardy does not accelerate their flight. So for example, let's say that these High Elves destroyed this unit of warriors. These guys over here, the Thunderers, are already fleeing, so they would not have to take an additional panic test. And third, remember that a unit does not take a panic test if it has already passed one earlier in the phase. So if we are in the magic phase and this unit has already passed their panic test with a roll of 6, they do not need to take another panic test or another one to be triggered in the same magic phase. Let's take a look now at some of the situations and circumstances under which it is most common to take a panic test. Heavy casualties. A unit must take a panic test immediately if it loses 25% or more of the models with which it started the phase. So for the sake of argument, let's use this example that the Prince on Griffin in the magic phase uses a spell to attack the Thunderers, and the Thunderers then take 3 wounds, so 3 of their models are killed. 3 models is therefore 30% of the number of models that they began this magic phase with, and thereby they need to roll a panic test with a leadership of 9. And with a 3, they pass. Typically, this test will most commonly be taken as a result of shooting attacks or damage caused by enemy spells, but it can also be triggered by other factors that cause casualties, such as miscasts, misfires, dangerous terrain tests, or other special rules. Rather than having a series of very specific triggers for a panic test, we use this as a catch-all to cover units that suffer high casualties for any reason. High casualty panic tests need to be taken even if a unit is charging and another unit is standing and shooting, and the standing and shooting unit causes more than 25% casualties. So in this example, were the Thunderers over here able to stand and shoot at the charging High Elf warriors, if those warriors suffered more than 25% damage in their unit, they would immediately have to take a panic test while they are charging. Sometimes this rule can lead to the situation in that the charging unit is panicking while it's still technically out of range of the enemy unit's missile weapons, and that can be a little bit odd. Under these circumstances, we assume the charging unit to have been shot at as soon as it entered the range, panicked, and then fled out of range again. So for the sake of this example, let's say that the Thunderers to the right have only a 12-inch range for their stand and shoot, and that they're able in fact to stand and shoot. Let's say that they do in fact cause 25% casualties. This is how this will look. The High Elves will come into the range and immediately flee once they get to that 12-inch range. Another case for a panic test is when a nearby friend has been annihilated. If a unit is destroyed for any reason, all friendly units within 6 inches must immediately test for panic. So for example, were this unit of Dwarf Thunderers to be completely annihilated, this unit of warriors would immediately need to take a panic test because they are within 6 inches of where this unit was annihilated. Another case is when a nearby friend breaks. If a unit breaks from close combat, all friendly units within 6 inches must immediately test for panic. So in this case, the Dwarf Thunderers are breaking from this combat with the High Elves, and therefore these warriors within 6 inches must make a test for panic. And finally, fled through. A unit must immediately test for panic if fleeing friends move through it. So in this case, we have the Dwarf Thunderers who are fleeing from this combat with the High Elves, and they are heading directly towards the warriors. Let's roll for their flee distance. And they will flee 5 inches. Five inches brought them into this unit, making them pop through them 1 inch here, as is the rules for fleeing through other units. In this case, this unit has now been fled through by a friendly unit that is breaking, and it will have to take a panic test. Of course, this is the most destructive form of panic, as one unit can panic and flee through another unit, which in turn might panic and flee through a further unit, and so on until your whole battle line is reduced to tatters. Direction of flight. If a unit fails a panic test, there are a couple different ways in which that unit will then flee. First, brought about by heavy casualties. Pivot the unit on the spot, ignoring other units so that it is facing directly away from the unit that caused the most casualties in that phase. It then flees as described on page 25. So back to this example of the Dwarf Thunderers who are in the magic phase being attacked by the Prince on Griffin. We'll say that this unit has suffered massive amount of casualties, and because of that, they are going to flee directly away from the Griffin. So we pivot this unit on the spot and flee it in this direction. Second, brought about by any other reason. Pivot the unit on the spot, ignoring other units, so that it is facing directly away from the closest enemy unit, and then flees as described on page 25. So in this case, were these Thunderers to flee, they would flee from the center of the closest unit here. We would need to pivot them around and send them off in that direction. Providing that the panicked unit doesn't carry itself off the board with its first flee move, you'll have a chance to rally it in later turns, as we discussed earlier on page 24.